Chapter 562. Fleischer felt like he couldn't breathe. In the darkness, he held up the candlelight and walked down the stairs slowly, as if he was walking into the bottom of the sea. Under his feet, layers of darkness rippled like the tide. Fleischer felt his toes go numb. He stopped and moved his feet. He felt his ankles become slightly stiff. It was the gradual petrification of the places where the light couldn't reach. The lower he went, the stronger the curse reverberating in the darkness. Even if he held up the candlelight slightly and formed a shadow for a moment, there would be faint petrification on the surface of his skin. Fortunately, as long as he didn't go too deep, this process could be reversed with young Master Ming's resistance. He paused for a moment, stretched his stiff body, and looked around. Beyond the lonely staircase, there was only darkness. It didn't make sense at all. Along the way, he felt that if he worked harder, he would be able to walk back to the Iron Crystal constellation. But he still didn't leave the branch control center. Now, he suddenly felt like this was just the beginning of a long journey. He still needed to go down. Under the guidance of a haunting figure, he jumped into the darkest place as if he was looking for death. Fleischer felt like he must be crazy. The solidified darkness was too cold. It was like it wanted to take away all his warmth and freeze him there. Even young Master Ming felt tired. Unfortunately, the Candle Crows were behind him with Gundams. Otherwise, he could at least call them out. During the long journey, he panted for a moment and continued walking. Beelzebub, are you there? He wanted to find someone to talk to. If he couldn't, he could talk to Tong Lin. I'm not here. Beelzebub had no interest in talking, which was rare. He sounded listless. Ignore me. I'm dying of discomfort. What's wrong? Fleischer asked. Brother, you're asking me what's wrong. Don't you know you're doing a dung pit butterfly marathon? Beelzebub complained. I can't breathe. What the hell? Fleischer was shocked. He looked around. It's been tens of millions of years. Where's the dung? For example, do you know what an example is? Beelzebub deeply felt that his life was not easy. Aren't you feeling terrible too? Magnify it 10,000 times, and that's what I feel. It can't be, right? I feel like a dozen cabinets are hitting my toes every second. What do you think? If the Three Wise Men system was still around, I would have lodged a complaint against you for abusing the elephant spirit. Beelzebub said unhappily. Before I became a pistol, I was at least Osiris's radar system. Even if the detection range has been greatly reduced, I can't stand this. You just feel a little uncomfortable. I'm about to suffocate to death. What exactly did you feel? I don't know how to tell you. Let me give you an analogy. It's like you're walking alone at night. As you walk, you suddenly realize that it's actually very lively at night. There are 100,000 people standing in hell quietly watching you, secretly preparing pots, pans, and other ingredients to come to you. It's the kind of thing where they're going to post a mukbang. To be honest, if I had a mouth, I would have spat it out a long time ago. Can you let me shoot twice? I'll be fine after 2 shots. You're not allowed to be fine. Suck it back. Fleischer coldly stuffed the pistol back into the holster. After Beelzebub's interruption, he finally felt much better. But in reality, he could feel it himself even without Beelzebub's reminder. The torrential pain and madness permeating the air. They rose and fell with the darkness, like sand in the tide. Even if he casually rubbed them, he could pinch a handful of ashes. Occasionally, when he passed by broken fences and unknown machines, he would reach out and touch them. He could feel the resentment and anger left in the steel. The combination of the source of despair and the precipitation of hell was too precise. It completely turned into an unbearable existence. It was as if he was walking among the tombstones. Everyone's screams and wails could be heard from the tombstones, recording everyone's appearance as they slowly sank into death. Fortunately, the journey in the deepest part of the darkness did not last long, because the path had come to an end. He saw Condra's hunched back again. He stood in front of the door that was full of cracks and scratches, like a ghost that had nowhere to go. When he slowly turned his head, his swollen face finally peeled off from his face, revealing countless spinning gears and tiny machines below. Like a beast hollowed out by worms, the tiny parts wriggled like living creatures. They slowly poked out from inside and then shrank back. His lips opened and closed soundlessly. He seemed to have said something. However, it suddenly disappeared, leaving no trace behind. Fleischer raised his hand behind him. The park guards gripped their weapons tightly, waiting for him. They moved forward bit by bit with him. They approached the door that had been sealed for countless years. It was like a piece of steel forged from countless bones. The veins on the door were intertwined with each other like limbs, forming a complicated lock that tightly sewed the entire door. But at that moment, the door made a sharp, ear-piercing sound. The dust fell, and the ancient words hidden behind the dust were revealed in front of him. He didn't know how much hatred and despair it contained to be able to hold an axe and leave such deep engravings and marks. Just looking at that line of words, there seemed to be countless sorrowful cries suddenly playing. Like a tide, Fleischer's vision turned black, and he staggered back. But the illusion quickly disappeared. It turned into a beast licking its wounds, roaring and murmuring in pain. When the sun disappears, we will produce the sun. Those ancient words whispered in his ear, if the night leaves us, then we will create the arrival of the night. We will eventually take back everything we have lost, even if we lose everything for this. With deep pain and anger, those words seemed to be engraved in his mind, making Fleischer dizzy. Just when he was having difficulty breathing, in front of him, the huge door slowly opened. On the door, the intertwined limbs broke, fell to the ground, and smashed into pieces. And in the ear-piercing roar, the darkness that had been sealed for countless years spewed out from it. In Fleischer's hand, the fire he held high was instantly extinguished by the storm. On his head, the crown that belonged to the Prince of Paradise appeared in an instant, lit up, and held up the tyrannical darkness for him with difficulty. It illuminated the scene in the deepest part of the darkness, from the scars left over from thousands of years ago. In the magnificent hall that was like a sacrifice to the gods, there was no display or decoration at this moment. It was so empty that it was frightening. But with the arrival of the light, everything sleeping in the darkness was illuminated. It was like a seal set up by alchemy. Countless shackles extended from those matrix-like secret instruments. They hung down and entangled with each other, firmly binding a wriggling mass of darkness in this palace. But now, with the opening of the door, the darkness that had been sleeping for thousands of years was awakened, surging wildly, as if boiling. It struggled wildly. Fleischer was horrified. Something was wrong. What was wrong? Why was there such a link like playing a game? Why was coming here like entering a dungeon? Why was the mechanism here like the player would automatically start a monster when he came here? Why was he suddenly able to understand those words? From the beginning, his actions had fallen into the control of something, including entering here. At first, it was just a vague premonition, but now he was completely sure. Inexplicably, the solemn skeleton in luxurious clothes appeared in his consciousness. Just as he understood something, he suddenly heard an ear-piercing scream. His head was in severe pain. Like seeing a volcanic eruption at close range, he could feel that despair, pain, and anger that had almost become tangible burst out from the bound darkness. The sound of the chains breaking was endless. With the rapid change of the darkness, the struggle and the eruption, countless bindings turned into dust and scattered to the ground. In the air, the viscous darkness suddenly swelled. Something was wriggling below. Suddenly, a palm-like limb pierced out from it, followed by another and another. 3 withered palms tore open the darkness. Just like a baby in labor, it slid out from the stinky black blood and landed on the ground, twitching and struggling crazily. One could vaguely make out that it was a human figure, but its limbs had become extremely strange. Most of its body had already liquefied into a black viscous substance, which was the essence of Origin's substance formed by endless despair and pain. One could faintly see broken bones within. When a liquid of pain and despair dripped down from the broken body, it revealed the clothes that seemed to be cast from steel. The robe that once seemed elegant and beautiful was now incomplete, becoming some kind of wreckage like fragments. Clearly, his entire body had been deformed beyond recognition, but in his arms he was holding a strange-looking yet gorgeous lantern, as if it was a treasure. Even after such a long period of time, it still looked brand new, without the slightest trace of damage or deterioration. It was more precious than its own life. Right now, under the wriggling darkness, the deformed skeleton bathed in the black rain. It slowly raised the wind lantern in its hand high up. Within the wind lantern, a pale flame once again lit up. It illuminated the broken face. The pitch-black liquid that flowed out of the eye sockets was like mottled tears of blood. In that instant, Huaisher finally saw the branch control center. A living branch control center was right in front of him. Sorry for the long wait. Recently, Kavenka has been too fierce. I decided to recommend a friend's book as a sacrifice. The Ember's Gun, also known as the Old Era's Gospel Soldier, Steampunk 2077, set in the Victorian era, the adventures of a door-kicking detective. Well, roughly. Please take a look. Chapter 563. In the dead silence, there was only the sound of bones rubbing against each other under the broken body. The moment the lights were lit, a fanatical flame appeared in the empty eye sockets. It was as if the soul had returned from a nightmare once again. Ah, Sunmaker, I beg you to be merciful. There was a whimpering sound, intermittent, hoarse, and sharp. It was the sleep talk of a soul lost in the abyss. I beg you, listen to our prayers. I beg you. The sobbing stopped abruptly, accompanied by the sound of bones rubbing against each other. The figure on the ground inconceivably turned around, and the fanatical flame illuminated where Huaisher and the others were. No, it's not you, he stared at Huaisher, as if in disbelief. Why isn't it you? For a moment, Huaisher thought that he wanted to sing and even gave himself a start. But Huaisher didn't care whether he wanted to sing or eat people. He took a step back, hid the blade of the sword of virtue behind him, and signaled the park guards behind him to be ready to attack at any time. Sorry, I went to the wrong place. He tried his best to squeeze out a kind smile and slowly stepped back. I'll go out now. Old Tai, you can continue to sleep. I won't disturb you anymore. Goodbye, good night, boom. After millions of years, anger and resentment turned into a torrent and swept over like a raging wave. Liar. The sharp voice burst out again, turning into a thunderous roar. Liar. Above his head, the wriggling darkness suddenly began to twitch like boiling asphalt, rapidly expanding. Countless metal flashes and fragments shook out from within, falling to the ground with a mournful sound. The high-pitched sound of iron breaking could not suppress the roar of despair. You promised. You clearly promised us. What the hell did I promise you? I'll come back and marry you after I pass the exam? Huaisher widened his eyes in shock. He didn't know whether it was because he owed money to this big brother from hell tens of millions of years ago, or because he had promised to take his unmarried daughter. But now the undisguised hatred had hit him in the face. The broken figure seemed to be pulled by an invisible rope, slowly rising from the ground. With the tips of his broken feet, he raised the gorgeous lantern in his hand towards Huaisher. Light that seemed to be solid gushed out from it, rising up and intertwining with each other, forming a strange miracle like an alchemy array. It was as if it was a combination of alchemy and the use of origin substances. It was as if Huaisher began to doubt his eyes. That guy, in front of him, was creating a miraculous medium, right in the middle of the complex structure formed by the interweaving of countless rays of light above his head. He was casting of the mark, accompanied by the interweaving of countless rays of light. A hoarse and crazy chant could be faintly heard. There were too many noises and strange noises mixed within, but among them there was a title repeatedly. The Changer, the Creator, the Changer, Lord of the 13 Hours, Myriad Changers, the Creator of all living things on earth, the Supreme Changer. When an exceptionally familiar crown slowly grew out of his skull in the shroud of light, Huaisher's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. It was clearly the same model he had seen on the skull. Even if the details were different, the style was exactly the same. That kind of special crown would never be forgotten after seeing it once. An indescribable conjecture emerged in Huaishi's mind. Wait, could it be that this thing is the changer mentioned in the alchemy? In the moment of shock, there was a dull roar like boiling from the darkness above the wreckage. Then, from the squirming asphalt-like darkness, a familiar face slowly emerged. Along with the friction of steel, a ferocious face was forged from the darkness. Countless sharp blades squirmed, and a slender body emerged from hell again. It was the steel centipede that Huaishir had seen before. Although its body had shrunk quite a bit, its agility had become terrifyingly shocking. In the blink of an eye, its huge body, which was several hundred meters long, had already drilled out of that squirming pitch-black mass and coiled around myriad transformations. It was incomparably intimate, as if it had seen its master. Okay, the case is solved. Realization dawned on Huaishir. You were the one who created those monsters. Without further instructions, the park guards behind Huaishir raised the shotguns in their hands in unison and pulled the trigger at the monster in front of them. Strike first and gain the upper hand. Otherwise, even the underlings were called out. Huaishir didn't think that he intended to introduce his pets to the guests who came from afar. Besides, he had seen more than one steel monster, the centipede. The hot metal rain spurted out in an instant, interrupting the high-pitched and strange alchemy. Then, the blade in Huaishir's hand dissipated and turned into a heavy axe. He bent down, lowered his body, and took a step forward. Like an arrow leaving the bow, under the pull of the arch, fascia, and even muscles, the huge step that was ready to go was suddenly activated at this moment. His figure shot out like lightning and rushed towards the changer that was surrounded by the giant centipede. Behind him, the 6 guards took the lead to throw away the shotguns in their hands, pulled out their heavy weapons, and rushed up. Holy! The giant rat men, shrouded in steel armor, roared. Their iron boots trampled on the ground, and the friction between the armor pages produced blazing sparks. They swung the huge chain blades and axes that ordinary people couldn't use and charged towards the angry steel centipede. Huaishir was faster than them. W-step, acceleration. At the moment of jumping up, Huaishir's speed increased again. Ignoring the faint pain in the soles of his feet, he had already brushed past the centipede's sharp blade feet, flew past the giant centipede's mouth, and descended from the sky. The angry axe in his hand rose with red flames. He aimed at the head of the changer. Jump! The changer did not move, as if it did not hear anything. The light of the wind lantern in his hand changed, and the asphalt-like dark matter above his head squirmed again. The moth that controlled the thundercloud revealed a scale claw from it, but it was unable to completely break free from the shackles of the asphalt. It seemed to have a difficult birth and was no longer as powerful as it was in its heyday. It could only extend its huge scale wings at the critical moment and block the axe blade. At the moment of collision, an ear-piercing sound burst out. Big brother, sister-in-law, Happy New Year! Huaishir roared. Triple drummer, thunderbolt. A huge force erupted for the second time, and the burning axe blade tore a gap between the steel wings like a hot knife through butter. Then, when Huaishir was about to attack again, he saw that behind the countless gaps in the scales, the changer had already turned around and looked at him with eyes burning with gloomy flames. He raised the wind lantern in his hand. The giant moth's iron wings suddenly disappeared and were replaced by the spider's 4 sharp limbs. They pierced through the viscous asphalt. Huaishir dodged pathetically, rolling around the centipede's blade-like legs without a care for her image. However, she suddenly let out a sigh of relief. Although she didn't know why this thing was locked up here, there was no doubt that after being sealed for so many years, its strength had weakened to the extreme. One could imagine how terrifying the existence known as the King of Changers in his heyday was. The entire Twilight Village was probably created by him. Just looking at the monsters underground that were still so terrifying after thousands of years was enough to prove his ability. After a simple test, he gradually had a guess in his heart. The opponent's strength was not strong, but the biggest deterrent came from the viscous asphalt-like darkness suspended above his head and the strange wind lantern in his hand. If he guessed correctly, the huge darkness above his head was a kind of forging furnace, and the wind lantern in the changer's hand was a tool to operate and control it. Perhaps the original myriad changers had been split up and stored in the production line, while his power was stored in the group of wandering monsters. With the reemergence of the sub-control center, his existence was pieced together again. Finally, he was born again in the world through the asphalt-like forging furnace. No one could say for sure whether this thing in front of him was the king of changers. Just by looking at his crazy appearance, one could know that something went wrong during the reconstruction process. No matter how strong the data storage medium was, it would be destroyed after such a long time. It was enough to prove how terrifying his skills were that he could come to hell again with the help of heavy forging. But now, he was probably weakened to the limit and could not even support the existence of two monsters here at the same time. Otherwise, he could have called out all the monsters. Even if they were all miniature versions, Huaishur would be dead today. Why would he need so much trouble? And just as Huaishur repeatedly tested and jumped skillfully, the roar of an explosion sounded from the periphery. It was the loud sound of Huaishur's alchemy bomb being detonated. The blazing heat wave spread along with the fire. After being strengthened and custom-made by the iron crystal base, the alchemy bomb and the liquid fuel Ramses' fury ushered in an upgrade. At least, it was dozens of times stronger than the goods that Huaishur casually made. Under the desperate attack of the park guards, the huge centipede's attention was attracted by the few who rushed at the front. Then, something stuck to his body. As the loud sound spread under the ravage of the impact, it broke into two pieces. But right after that, the broken centipede turned from one to two. It was just like an earthworm. The huge centipede angrily attacked these intruders who overestimated themselves. Among them, one had turned around and rushed in the direction of the changer. The Scarlet Compound eyes locked on a Huaishur's location. "Grandmaster, I have a question." At the same time, in the truck's cab, Raymond looked at the image uploaded by the park guards and couldn't help but ask. Beside him, the projection of the Grand Master crossed his arms and looked at the data on the instrument. He said casually, "Go ahead. Why do I just look here?" Chapter 564. Why am I just watching from here? Redmond scratched his head, unable to figure it out. What? Do you want to drink some soda and watch while lying down? The Grand Master glanced at him expressionlessly. "It's work time. Don't be too outrageous." "No, it's not about how I watch. But it's not good to just stand there." "Am I really a traitor?" The Grand Master asked without raising his head. "Aren't you?" Raymond's expression suddenly became awkward. "Grandmaster, I've only jumped ship once in my life. Don't escalate to the level of personal attacks, okay? I've reflected on myself. Although the direction of my reflection isn't quite right, at least I have principles, okay? Your principles have nothing to do with me. I could see your work at a glance." The Grandmaster's meaning was very simple. Just do your own thing and don't think about other things. Raymond shook his head and sighed, looking at the sorry figure in the surveillance video. Can he handle it? Look at you, as if he can handle it. The Grand Master was very puzzled about where his confidence came from. Raymond was stunned. Isn't that just sending him to his death? There's probably a 1% chance that he can handle it, right? The Grand Master shrugged. I'm not familiar with Russell's people, but since he's his student, I cut him in half according to Russell's work standards. I just hope he didn't pick this secretary just to make up the numbers. Then what if he really dies? If he can't handle it, then run. Otherwise, why would I call you? The Grand Master looked at him as if he was an idiot and commanded from a distance. Don't just stand there. Set up the data collection equipment. This is an important record. Another dashboard rose. Dozens of huge scanning devices appeared on the back of the truck, recording every detail and data in detail and transmitting it to the iron crystal. It was a completely different way of fighting from the Ascendants. It was a lost skill created by an unknown path that the present realm had never stepped on before. It was a realm different from common sense and imagination, and also the essence left behind in this once prosperous hell. According to the decipherment of the Iron Crystal constellation, The person who grasped this power was called the Forger. Instead of binding the calamity miracles and assimilating them into one's own body, it was forging something similar to alchemy, granting the power of the abyss to matter, thus avoiding the mutation of one's body to the greatest extent. The Twilight Village that was left behind was the final creation left behind by all the casters. Although it's not as versatile as a sublimator, it's much stronger on the path of creation. The direction of strengthening was not exploration, but defense and construction. If that's the case, the threshold would definitely be higher than that of a pure alchemist or scholar. Furthermore, one would need to possess a physique similar to that of sublimator. No, now that I think about it, it would be to create a physique similar to that of a sublimator to resist the corrosion of the abyss. So that's how it is. The Grandmaster narrowed his eyes. Only those who can transform their physique into something similar to a ascended one can truly become a forger. Compared to convenience, the high mortality rate is not a problem. What a pity such a skill was lost just like that. Raymond finally crawled back from outside. It felt like repairing an old-fashioned television, constantly adjusting the position of the antenna to ensure that the signal was transmitted smoothly. Hearing the Grandmaster's words, he became curious. With such a skill, the developed civilization and the power to transform the world are still not enough to resist the depth brought by hell? Who says it's not enough? The Grandmaster sneered. Didn't those guys who overestimate themselves succeed? Raymond was at a loss, and then he seemed to understand something. He could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. You mean the current Twilight Village was created by them? Yes, all of this is the monument formed by their success in resisting hell. The Grandmaster said indifferently, full of arrogance. After abandoning the original good ending, they crawled out of their own grave and jumped into another hell. The former Twilight Village was undoubtedly such a place. Otherwise, it would not have fallen into the hands of the Purgatory Workshop masters and could not be freed. The hell you see now is the result of this arrogance. The sharp roar burst forth again. The ever-changing one seemed to be even crazier, waving the lantern in its hand. In an instant, the huge spider fell apart and turned into iron shavings. Then, the asphalt-like furnace above his head boiled again. Just as Huaishur was about to seize this opportunity and attack crazily, he saw endless iron light flying out. It was a scene as bright as the stars. But in the light, huge locusts flapped their wings one after another. Just like a storm, countless flying insects as thick as arms flapped their wings, crisscrossing in the air like lightning. When they fell from the sky, they roared like cannonballs. In a loud noise, the ground under Huaishur's feet kept shattering. The heavy locusts smashed into the ground like cannonballs. Soon, they climbed up, shook their wings, and rose into the sky again with the sound of gears spinning. Under the continuous bombardment, Huaishur could not breathe at all. He pulled out Beelzebub and fired continuously, but he was either blocked by the swarm of insects or deflected by the wings that extended from the furnace. Even though he hesitated several times, he did not activate the trial mode in the end. There were only 3 bullets left. After experiencing the mistake with Liz, Huaishur really did not dare to waste such a precious opportunity. He had to be sure that he would be able to create the corresponding value. Now, as the lantern was raised again, the iron light all over the sky fell toward Huaishur. The heavy shield quickly assembled in front of Huaishur's eyes. Then, there were continuous loud noises. Soon, even the alloy shield began to distort. From the beginning until now, the park guards had lost 5 people. Less than half of them were left. The crisis of death kept appearing. Huaishur gritted his teeth, pulled out the burning flag, and stabbed it into the ground. He did not summon the crows, but in an instant, rolling darkness spread out. The bone burial sanctuary instantly descended. It disturbed all senses. In the darkness, Huaishur took a deep breath and suddenly separated all the afterimages. The overwhelming afterimages galloped chaotically in the hall, attracting most of the firepower. Huaishur's body had suddenly disappeared from the spot. He flashed 3 times in a row. He had almost used up most of his origin form. In the sudden ringing in the ears, Huaishi's figure had broken through the long barrier and suddenly appeared in front of the ever-changing. The hammer of pain, ready to strike, smashed down. The flaming hammer roared and rumbled. The eyes on the wolf's head burned blood red. When the hammer smashed down, the air also made a cracking sound as if it could not bear the weight. It was a blow that was almost self-sacrificing, scattering this enormous pain. Now, punishment fell from the sky, and there was no dodging. A loud boom. The ever-changing's body collapsed instantly. It exploded on the spot. Countless viscous liquids like asphalt shot out in all directions. Then, the fragments fell to the ground like rain. Only the lantern fell into the viscous black liquid like blood. The fire gradually dimmed, but there was a choked voice from the wreckage. "Sunmaker, please answer me," the hoarse voice asked. "This kind of tribulation, when will it end?" No one responded. A high-pitched hiss burst out from the asphalt furnace. The squirming thing rapidly expanded, but then it let out a roar that was thousands of times louder than before. Countless viscous substances poured out of the broken furnace. It was like a rainstorm. The black torrent poured over the broken wind lantern, causing the burning flames to spread rapidly and ignite the darkness. The broken bones wriggled in the black blood, and then the viscous black blood all over the ground also rippled. A pair of ferocious wings rose from it, followed by a bird-like silhouette, but the silhouette was constantly collapsing and reforming. As more and more shapes emerged from it, it looked like a giant wolf. Finally, when the countless wriggling limbs pieced together, it formed a ferocious giant with a huge crown on its head. It was as if the king of the world had descended here, so majestic that no one dared to look directly at it. But the solemn giant only had a broken upper body. The lower body was empty, and only countless deformed organs and broken parts fell from it. As the giant swung its arm, it dragged in the black blood pool. Once again, it let out a hoarse roar that was difficult to be heard by the human ear. The crazed and bizarre giant raised its hand and slammed it down on Huaishi. Waves of air swept out and the earth shook. Between its fingers, viscous black blood dripped down. Countless body parts rose from the blood, constantly piecing themselves together into various broken limbs that wriggled in a frenzy. It was rapidly decaying and rapidly regenerating. It was stubbornly unwilling to die, but could no longer continue to live. In the sorrowful and choked roar, the viscous black blood ignored gravity, rose into the sky, and turned into a sharp rainstorm, sprinkling in all directions. F*CK, the second stage. Huaishi roared angrily. "Where the F*CK did you come from?" The hammer of pain was swung, and with all its strength, it smashed into the giant hand that was slapping down again. The boundless power collided, and Huaishi was sent flying. His vision went black. In his hand, the hammer of pain shattered inch by inch. The origin substance structure had actually been destroyed by this attack, and it would be difficult to use in a short period of time. Countless scattered pains wreaked havoc in his soul, causing him to involuntarily roar in pain. The palm also started to twitch as it was struck by the pain transmitted from the hammer. The black blood that made up the flesh and blood surged and boiled crazily. It mutated into a strange structure and quickly fell off, revealing incomplete and deformed bones. Huaishi had already landed on the ground, and once again he madly dashed out. In his hand, the virtuous sword hummed and suddenly lit up with a resplendent light. It slashed forward, tearing apart the wriggling rainwater like a hot knife through butter. Amidst the chaos, a fleeting crack was cut open. The giant raised its hand, and the pitch-black arm wriggled, rapidly transforming into the outline of a savage wolf, biting at Huaishi. Shadow Burial. Once again, the afterimage spread out. The young arbiter of life's ability was activated again, and Huaishi's body flickered in the air, appearing in front of the giant wolf out of thin air, seeking his own death. The virtuous sword in his hand was held upside down, and as his body fell, he stabbed downwards. A sorrowful cry suddenly burst forth. It was accompanied by the crisp sound of a skull shattering. The blade of the sword pierced deeply into the giant wolf's face amidst Huaishur's roar, cutting through the ferocious eye, tearing apart the eye socket, and chiseling a crack in its face. When the crack began to rapidly close, Huaishur swung his hand and forcefully stuffed the bomb in his hand into the giant wolf's eye socket. In the blink of an eye, blazing flames erupted from the giant wolf's body, spreading out, tearing apart the hard bones, and spraying in all directions. Waves of air spread out. Huaishur was sent flying. It's not over yet. In midair, his body turned around, and he suddenly threw out the sorrowful rope, which wrapped around the giant's neck, and then contracted. In the reflection of the pair of empty eyes, Huaishur rushed towards him. He gambled on his last origin substance. The sorrowful melody of the cello played here. 9 chords, Xiang Dragon. Decapitation. Chapter 565. Xiang Dragon. This was Elder Luo's ultimate skill, the ultimate move from the Orchard Gym. In reality, it was just something Ghost Animal equals King came up with after doing 2 sets of anaerobic exercises one night while sipping on protein powder and herbal tea. Elder Luo felt that it would work, and then it worked. If one were to say how profound this move was, it would only be SOSO. There was no mysterious mystery or terrifying power enough to ravage physics. If one had to talk about the essence, it was just a combination of origin substance technique and muscle usage. Under the premise that Huaishur could switch weapons at any time, it achieved double the output in an instant. It was a different kind of strength. There were 2 main points. First, it was strong. Second, it was fast. In an extremely short instant that ordinary people and even sublimators could not react in time, he used all weapons to carry out a round of explosive output, relying on the special characteristics of the weapons to quickly and violently destroy. In addition to the impact of the material, there was also the wild waves of origin substance. It could not be compared to senior sister Luo Xian's unimaginable skills. This was a skill that truly belonged to Huaishur, and only Huaishur could display 1,000% of its destructive power. Apart from Huaishur's confinement hand, no one else in the entire realm could perfectly control so many S-class border relics at the same time. Those weapons that were born from his soul were purely physical objects formed by the qualitative change of origin substance. Each one of them was a dangerous object born violent, arrogant, and ruthless. Apart from Huaishur, who was the source, no one else could gain their recognition, and no one else could display the ferocious power hidden under the steel. Now, following the contraction of the sorrowful rope, a burning iron light rose from Huaishur's hand. In a flash, in the short moment that was almost frozen, in a flash of lightning that was difficult to see with the naked eye, there was only violent light crisscrossing, slashing, cutting, piercing, charging. In the end, a bright light rose from the sword of virtue and tore everything apart. The vast and mighty night ended here. After the moment of crisscrossing, what followed was a loud explosion. Air waves swept out, and only the trajectories and outlines of countless weapons could be seen crisscrossing in the air. Soaked in black blood, they outlined a tragic and sinister outline. The afterimage disappeared in a flash. When Huaishur landed on the ground and staggered 2 steps forward, the sound of the giant crashing to the ground came from behind him. The huge head fell off from the shoulder. No matter how hard the wriggling asphalt tried to reconnect, it could not reconnect. The lonely head with the crown fell to the ground and rolled slowly. The shattered face fell into a pool of blood, and the empty eyes were still filled with madness. When Huaishur turned around and slowly walked over, the twisted head opened its mouth and roared. It struggled with all its might, causing the headless corpse to prop up its body again and crawl over crazily. It raised its deformed palm and slapped down at Huaishur. That's enough. Let's stop here. Ignoring its desperate struggle, Huaishur raised his hand. In the reflection of the empty eye sockets, the black barrel of the Lord of the Flies gun was pointed at his eyes. Beelzebub, Huaishur said, The carving of the Lord of the Flies on the handle lit up with scarlet light, and he grinned. Lock on. Fleischer pulled the trigger. And so, judgment came. Super small judgment device, Lord of the Flies, full output. Liberation. The arbitration from Osiris came. The roar spread. The abominable darkness and roars evaporated in the face of this pure light. Even Fleischer's arm, which was holding the spear, began to crack under the intense reaction force. However, the pure destruction still spread out along with the pure power. Straight ahead, straight ahead. The high temperature instantly pierced through the giant's eyes and came out of the skull. After burning all the black blood, it rushed into the giant's huge body, tore open the giant's mutated lungs, and came out from the other side. It was unstoppable. In the blink of an eye, it crossed a long distance and penetrated the entire huge underground space. But this time, it did not penetrate the thick wall and fly out. Instead, it made an incredible turn in the air like a refracted light and suddenly turned back. The dazzling light refracted and intertwined in the air. Under the constraints and calculations of Lord of the Flies, the destruction ran on the preset trajectory like a tame dog, and it fell down like a thunderbolt. At that moment, the endless light tracks intertwined with each other, covering the entire cage. From the sky, from the ground, from the front, back, left, and right, they pierced and rotated repeatedly. The intertwined and rotated light beams cut horizontally and vertically, flying so quickly. Finally, they suddenly dissipated in the air. In the end, there was a loud sound like a fortress collapsing. In front of Fleischer, the sound of collapsing came from the broken skull and body. Countless screams of metal breaking came from it. Then, the giant suddenly collapsed, turning into flying sand and dust. It was the end. Even Fleischer was shocked by the power of this attack. He could not believe it. My new function. You didn't expect it, did you? In his consciousness, Beelzebub laughed proudly and said in a low voice, I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep for a while. Next time, if you want to listen crosstalks, make yourself an MP3 player. Also, be careful. Before he could finish, Lord of the Flies fell silent. In the darkness, Fleischer shrugged. He pushed away the remains in front of him and picked up the lantern from the pieces of his robe. There was still a bit of light in the broken lantern. The moment Fleischer picked it up, the remaining black blood on the ground quickly shrank and returned to the lantern, covering the lantern's handle and appearance with a faint layer of darkness. Holding the lantern in her hand, Fleischer seemed to be resonating with the entire strange palace, and her suppressed senses began to spread. He finally sensed what Beelzebub wanted to remind him of before he fell asleep. Behind him, at the entrance of the hall, there was a figure standing there. His opponent from the Ivy League, a rank 3 sublimator of the American lineage, as well as the inheritor of noble blood and the high priest of the first son, Liz Hetmock. Now, she was holding the stone-toothed sword and waiting calmly. After sufficient rest and treatment, her strength had returned to its peak. No, after the short warm-up with Fleischer, she was even stronger than before. It was obvious that she could not wait any longer. Behind her, the sublimators from the Ivy League and the mercenaries from the Eye of Nightmares had already raised their weapons, no longer hiding their killing intent. Beside Fleischer, the injured park guards were expressionless. They just lowered their heads and loaded their shotguns, silently pulling the bolts. They were ready to welcome the arrival of war. In the silence, Fleischer looked back at Liz and asked curiously, Long time? Have you been waiting for a long time? Not long, about 2 minutes. Since the second stage of that thing you mentioned. Liz thought for a long time and asked seriously, By the way, what is the second stage? It's a game term. Fleischer explained. It refers to when some powerful enemies will go berserk after their HP drops to a certain level, becoming more threatening and aggressive. It sounds interesting. In fact, it will be very painful because you'll die if you're not careful. Because at this time, the enemy will become very dangerous. Liz asked, just like just now? Just like now, Fleischer replied calmly. I kind of want to give it a try. Liz's fingers tapped on the hilt of the stone sword, and her beautiful smile gradually became ferocious. So despicable. Huaisher chuckled softly. To be honest, I thought you were the upright type who would let me rest for a while. Once I'm fully recovered, we'll fight to the death or something like that. Isn't that too stupid? Liz asked back. The weaker the enemy, the better. Although it's fun to trample on the strong, isn't it right to bully the weak? Won't this tarnish the glory of your god? The first son has never cared about empty reputation. Liz raised her head calmly without any shame. It prefers efficiency and only looks at the results. Therefore, sneak attacks and poisoning are never prohibited during a battle. Kukul Khan's believers might like this more, right? Therefore, although it's a pity, I don't feel any burden in my heart in the face of such a situation. Instead, I feel quite happy. Huaisher raised his eyebrows slightly. In other words, there's only one choice? That's right. Liz raised the sword in her hand, and her smile gradually turned cold. That's to fight to the death. I surrender. Huaisher raised his hands. The silence was sudden, as if a husky had stabbed everyone in the throat with a fire stick. Liz, the Ivy League ascendants, the mercenaries of the Eye of Nightmare. Only the park guards had solemn expressions as they chanted solemnly, "Holy!" What the hell? Liz was stunned for a long time. She almost thought that he was going to use this opportunity to launch a sneak attack, so she subconsciously raised her guard. However, Huaisher still stood there with his hands raised. She could not react in time. Her confused little face was filled with the words, "What the hell?" What did you say? Didn't you hear me clearly? Huaisher looked at him in confusion. He cleared his throat, coughed, and said solemnly, I, Huaisher, surrender. Next, I will disarm and cooperate with your imprisonment and detention. However, as the inspector of the Astronomy Association, I ask you to treat the captives well and abide by the present Realm Peace Convention. You can't seize my personal belongings or cause physical or mental harm to me in any name. Also, you have to ensure that I eat and sleep every day according to the present realm standards. Otherwise, I have the right to appeal to my superiors at any time and sue the Ivy League for their cruel treatment of me. An ear-piercing voice suddenly erupted, interrupting Huaisher's words. The stone-toothed sword drew a sharp mark on the ground. You better know when to stop. Liz roared angrily. The blonde girl widened her eyes in anger. She glared at Huaisher in front of her and even cursed. What the F***CK are you talking about? Don't you have any shame at all? Pick up your sword and fight me to the death. Am I not surrendering? I'm not even sad. So why are you angry? Huaisher asked seriously. Also, can I interpret this as you insulting my personality? I will also write your words in the report. He said in a trembling voice. Please respect the captives, Madam Liz. Chapter 566. There was silence, a long silence. Huaisher raised his hand, and Liz looked at him. The others were stunned on the spot, and the park guards were shouting for God. Everyone seemed to have a bright future. After a long time, Liz's fingers, which were holding the hilt of her sword, finally clenched tightly and stabilized. She no longer trembled in anger, as if she had regained her calmness. Do you think I can't deal with you like this? Liz stared at him and asked calmly. Or do you think you can continue to tease me? No, you're wrong, Ms. Liz. Of course, I'm not that arrogant. Huaisher still maintained the standard French posture. He raised his hand high and smiled sincerely. Of course you have a way to solve the problem in front of you, but what happens after you solve it? Before tomorrow, the news of you rejecting the surrender of an inspector of the Astronomical Association and brutally killing him will spread throughout the entire realm. With a strange smile on his face, he lifted his eyes and looked behind Liz. However, his smile made those people feel a sense of danger. It was so meaningful. I think that even if the people of the Ivy League can keep their mouths shut, the Eye of Nightmare might not be airtight. Looking at the slightly changing faces, Huaisher's smile became more and more cheerful. Why don't you let me use my remaining strength to help you solve these worries before I die? Don't worry. I don't carry any extra communication equipment with me. Nothing will leak out of here. Liz asked indifferently, Do you think I care? I know that you're the high priest of the first son, and I know that you're the backbone of the American genealogy. Don't worry, I don't underestimate your status at all. Huaisha paused for a moment and suddenly asked, but aren't you underestimating me too much? Liz didn't say anything. I'm a registered military officer with an internal rating of S rank in the General Administration, a judge of the Astronomical Association, and an official member of the Celestial Genealogy, the assistant secretary and agent of the principal of the Ivory Tower. I'm the official Green Sun nemesis, and I'm a thorn in the side of the rancher. Huaisha flipped his finger, and his phone appeared out of thin air, spinning at his fingertips. Do you believe that if I call Golden Dawn and tell them that I want to turn over a new leaf, Mathers will drive the realm of dreams over to snatch me away? If I die here in a dishonorable manner, Madam Liz, my former boss, comrades, and friends will not let you go. To tell you the truth, I'm quite popular. I have friends in the Directorate of Defense, the Preservation Institute, and even the archaeology team and the tech department. Not long ago, the elevated floor even invited me for an internship. Do you want to see my number book? If I remember correctly, Mr. Lucien is the exploration consultant of the Alliance. Speaking of this, Huaisha couldn't help but smile. I can guarantee that if the cause of my death is leaked, the Astronomy Association will hold a border court for you. Can you really bear this responsibility? Being the lackey of the Heavenly Literature Festival was great. It was great to have someone to hug behind his back. Even if he was a traitor, the feeling of being able to call people over whenever he wanted was simply too great. Unfortunately, there wasn't anyone to help him with his resume. He even had to say it himself, which lowered his status a bit, but as long as it was useful, it was enough. He especially admired Liz's calm expression. He could feel the anger hidden beneath her solemn expression. Huaisha's finger flicked as he glanced behind Liz. He was almost there. His origin substance was just a little bit away, enough for him to use shadow burial again. With the guard staying behind to cover his retreat, he could directly jump behind the door and make use of the surrounding dark environment to sneak and escape with his talent as a ghost. But in that instant, the recovery of his origin substance came to an abrupt halt. Just a little bit more. It was as if someone had pressed the pause button. No, it wasn't just as if. Because in the darkness outside the door, a hand had reached out, holding a remote control. It aimed at Huaisha and pressed a button. Pause. It wasn't just his origin substance. Even his body was frozen in place. He couldn't move. If Liz can't take responsibility, then I'll give the order. How about it? The old man slowly walked out of the darkness and took off his helmet, revealing his white hair. He said to the young girl next to him, "You're still too young, child. When you run into this kind of guy, you shouldn't give him any chance to speak. Even though it's not something to be seen in public, you should at least know a bit about these dirty tricks." Teacher's teachings are correct. Liz nodded and moved to the side, not showing any anger or dissatisfaction. Huaisha's eyes twitched. He tried to move them again. He wanted to speak. The old man picked up the remote control, aimed it at him, and pressed it again. Huaisha finally let out a sigh of relief. He could breathe again. Even though he still couldn't move his body, he could at least move his mouth. "Excuse me, who are you?" He tried to move his eyes and look over as he asked curiously. The old man calmly said, "Michelle. You could just call me Michelle." "Never heard of you." After a brief moment of silence, Huaisha awkwardly asked, Are you very famous?" Michelle's expression froze. He didn't react. "Where are you from? How many fans do you have on Twitter? How much traffic do you have? You look very powerful. Are you a big shot in America who sings country music? Do you want us to be fans of each other?" "Shut up." Liz interrupted his nonsense. Just as she was about to say something, Michelle raised her hand and pressed the remote control again. Huaisha, shut up. "Forget it. Since you've already surrendered, just take him back." Michelle waved his hand. "At least this is considered a reward." As he spoke, he walked forward and reached out his hand to take the lantern from Huaisha's hand. Soon, Huaisha, who had been hit with the pause button, was tied up. Liz even put tape on his mouth to shut him up for personal vengeance. Under the tight security and vigilance, he was escorted and pushed out. Just as he was about to walk out of the branch control center, Michelle stopped and looked back at him. "Right. Did you bring an umbrella? We don't have any extra here." Huaisha was stunned and puzzled. He mumbled under the tape, Is it already daytime? No, it's just because it's raining. Michelle held up a big white umbrella and crossed the door in front of him. Then, the bloody rainstorm outside appeared in front of his eyes. Huaishir was stunned. She raised her head and looked up, only to find that the originally sealed underground space was now exposed to the sky. This was because an entire piece of land, together with the thick rock layer, had been violently ripped open by some unknown method. These guys had actually created a huge crater outside, exposing the entire underground world. Just outside the branch control center, countless people were holding umbrellas or holding up rainproof equipment. They had already occupied the entire underground world. Before Huaishir could react, the person behind him pushed him violently. He staggered forward and walked into the rainwater. Then, under the mocking gaze of others, Huaishir was instantly covered by the bloody rain. Well, it was cool. Huaishir shook his hair. It felt quite good. Speaking of which, Grandmaster, why are we still watching here? No, didn't I ask this question already? In the truck of the branch control center, Raymond scratched his head and cheeks. He felt that his conscience was being condemned. Are we really not going to save him? Grandmaster, you must have a way, right? Well, I originally planned to save him. I've already prepared everything. Grandmaster pinched his chin and seemed to be thinking, but his performance successfully convinced me. Raymond was surprised. How did Huaishir perform? How did he convince you? And what exactly did he convince you about? I suddenly feel it's quite good to have someone who can enter the inner circle of Ivy League. Anyway, his identity is there. As long as we don't break the agreement, they definitely won't kill him. Why not just let him stir up trouble in the enemy's inner circle? Grandmaster asked seriously, don't you think so? Raymond actually couldn't refute. From the bottom of his heart, he really wanted to save his teammate. But when Grandmaster said this, he realized that there were more benefits for this teammate to stand on the opposite side than to save him. Although it was heartless to say this, Huaishir inexplicably gave others an illusion. Even if the Twilight Village exploded, nothing would happen to this guy. Moreover, with his ability, maybe he could live well in the inner circle of Ivy League. Of course, the illusion was one thing. The other thing was that he trusted Grandmaster. Since Grandmaster made such arrangements, there must be a way to ensure Huaishir's safety. But this isn't very good. Raymond's expression became distressed. Don't worry. Grandmaster calmly waved his hand. I've already communicated with him. When? Just now. Grandmaster retracted his gaze and looked into the distance. On the other side, everyone looked as if they had seen a ghost. Huaishir walked in the pouring rain of blood and stretched lazily. Nothing happened to him. Not only nothing happened to him, but this guy also seemed to be refreshed. He shook his head and hummed a song. He felt a vigorous vitality. His whole body was energized. Where the hell did this freak come from? The surrounding people looked more and more astonished. On his body, even the small injuries he suffered in the previous battle showed signs of recovery. If it wasn't for Michelle's strange remote control, he might have already recovered to full health. His mood gradually became better. He didn't even worry about what would happen to him. However, as he walked, Huaishir's mouth suddenly felt uncomfortable. Under the tape, it felt like something was suddenly stuffed into his mouth. It was hard and made him very uncomfortable. He opened his teeth slightly and licked it with his tongue. He felt a series of undulating sawtooth. A key? He looked back at the branch control center behind him and raised his eyebrows slightly. Soon, under the impatient push from the people behind him, he retracted his gaze and continued to walk forward. Gulp. He swallowed the key into his stomach. Chapter 567. He felt that something was wrong with the rain. It had only been drenched for 2 minutes. Why did it feel like it had been drenched for 2 days? In the rain, Huaishir could not help but sneeze. The people behind him began to push him violently. Huaishir staggered forward weakly, only to feel that his hands and feet were cold. Could this world still be good? What should he do to satisfy the Ivy League? Tears were about to flow down his cheeks. He only felt that hell was empty and the devil was in front of him. By the time he got on the aircraft, his entire body was already drenched. He shook off the water droplets on his hair, raised his shackled hand. and rubbed his nose with difficulty. He looked around at the eyes of Nightmare, who had unfriendly expressions on their faces. He grinned and greeted them in a friendly manner. "Hello, everyone." He looked at someone who seemed to be the captain and asked, "Sorry, do you have a cigarette?" The captain, who was smoking, raised his head and looked at him coldly. His expression was cold, and he did not say anything. When the door of the cockpit slowly closed and the people outside could no longer see the scene inside, he suddenly walked forward. The people on both sides reached out and held Huaisher down. Just as he was about to struggle, he saw the burly captain raise his hand and punch himself in the stomach. Huaisher couldn't help but bend over from the immense force. He retched. He almost vomited out the key that he had just swallowed. Then he was pulled by his hair and forcefully pulled up. "Don't think that you can curry favor with me, just because you're some T inspector." The captain pulled out a dagger and pointed it at Huaisher's face. He told him word by word, "I don't care." Unlike the Ivy League, this group of mercenaries who had been living in hell were not afraid of the authority of the Astronomical Society. After leaving the current state and the border, even the power of the Central Bureau could not radiate everywhere. Most of the people in the Tomb of the Returnless were lawless characters like this. Perhaps one of them had killed someone from the Astronomical Association and escaped to hell. The title of inspector was worthless to them. Moreover, it had not even been an hour since Huaisher had inflicted such heavy losses on them. How could they treat this prisoner as a guest of honor? "You'd better behave yourself on the road. Don't try anything funny." As he spoke, the captain's dagger slowly slid across Huaisher's face, coldly slicing open a wound. The color of blood gushed out. The 6 layers of shackles restricted Huaisher's extraordinary abilities, forcing him back into the realm of an ordinary person. There was no poison left to protect himself. This time, it was the bright red blood of an ordinary person. It flowed down slowly. "Let me hear another word of nonsense from your mouth." The captain shook off the blood on the blade expressionlessly, bent down, and stared into his eyes. He said coldly, "I'll cut off one of your fingers." They looked at each other in silence. The corners of Huaisher's mouth suddenly curled into a smile. The blood-stained face smiled. It was as if he had easily caught a glimpse of the weakness under that tough face and was mocking him. "But you won't dare to kill me, right? Old 9. The captain stared at him and suddenly gave the order. Immediately, a guard next to him got up, lifted his wrist forcefully, and pried open his fingers. From beginning to end, Huaisher did not resist much. But before the blade fell, he suddenly said, "Hell Music Association." His movements paused. The captain slowly raised his eyes, and his expression became colder. "What did you say?" "He said some annoying things." Huaisher smiled and shrugged. "I know that some people will be unhappy if I say this, but I still have to remind you." He said, "If you don't care about the identity of Inspector, then what about the Calamity Musician?" Huaisher looked into his eyes and asked softly, "You cut off one of the Calamity Musician's fingers? What will the Hell Music Association think? There is an agreement between you, right? Who will provide you with the treatment of soul wounds. Well, by the way, I'm also an Abyss cooking demon, officially certified by the Cooking Demon Competition Organizing Committee. Maybe you want to see my certificate? What if I can't buy food and poison? Also, I'm also a legendary investigator of the Dark Net, the largest intelligence transit station in all borders. You know what you're doing, right?" Silence. Silence and silence came suddenly. On the captain's face, the angry veins under his forehead could be faintly seen, making him look even more ferocious. And Huaisher was still smiling. On his face, the ferocious blade had begun to close slowly. Other than the illusionary blood, there were no other traces left. "Now, you can chop off all 10 of my fingers, or let me ask the question again." Huaisher smiled and asked, "Sorry, do you have a cigarette?" When Raymond and the others returned to the base, it was already late at night. Behind the gate, before Raymond got out of the car, he saw the girl in the gray skirt waiting there. The old driver suddenly had a headache. How should he explain it to her? He wanted to pretend that he didn't see anything and sneak away quietly. But after waiting for a while, Huaisher didn't appear. Yuan's expression changed slightly, and she walked toward him. "Mr. Raymond, where is teacher?" Is he not here? Raymond froze in place, feeling that his few brain cells began to overload and shut down. I'm sorry, your teacher was sold by the heartless grandmaster and thrown to the other side as a captive. But don't worry, the other side will definitely be more upset than us. He couldn't say such words at all. Under the girl's uneasy gaze, his expression became more and more complicated, and he subconsciously avoided Yuan's gaze. Until Yuan sensed that something was wrong. She took a step forward and asked again, Mr. Raymond, where did teacher go? After a short silence, Raymond lowered his head and stammered, Your teacher? He went to a place far away. Silence came suddenly. He felt that he seemed to have said something wrong. Raymond tried to make up for it. He quickly turned around and took out something that Huaisher didn't take with him from the passenger seat and handed it to Yuan. This is what Huaisher left behind. Yuan froze in place. She took in a daze and looked down at the helmet in her hand. She turned it over and saw the peach-colored pig-shaped graffiti in the corner. Unbelievable. She still remembered this graffiti. Her teacher had casually drawn it when she was resting and had used her marker. At that time, her teacher even joked that he would draw one for her and little 19 when he came back in a few days. But Yuan now realized that she couldn't wait for that man to come back. It was so sudden. In the silence, she squatted on the ground little by little, hugging the helmet tightly, and couldn't hold back her tears anymore and cried loudly. Beside her, Raymond was at a loss. Wait, did she misunderstand something? Just 3 days after Huaisher was killed. In the base of the Ivy League, at the entrance of the 6th floor underground, Liz passed the security check and raised her wrist to show the QR code projected by the stigmata. Level A authority, login name Liz. The blonde girl said, I want to enter the dungeon to interrogate prisoner E01. Behind the desk, the recorder passed the authority and the door slowly opened. He raised his eyes and looked at the expressionless Liz, looking a little surprised. Is the high priest going to go down too? He sighed. It seems that these 2 days are really lively. I'll go down and take a look after the shift changes later. Liz sensed that something was wrong and frowned. But in the end, she didn't ask anything. Instead, she turned and walked into the elevator. Down. He passed through the heavy blockades and walked into the most dangerous prison. Then, the door opened in front of him. An uneasy voice came from the end of the line in front of him. Mr. Huaisher, I've been out of breath recently, and I feel dizzy and flustered for no reason. Is there a big problem? Then, a kind, gentle, and trustworthy voice asked, Does this happen when you're resting? Occasionally. Does it happen when you're alone? Yes. It might be claustrophobia. It's fine in the early stages, but if the situation is left unchecked for too long, it may worsen and deepen, affecting your physical condition. You should be prone to anorexia now, right? Yes, that's right. I eat very little. The sound of writing came from the end of the long line from the cell. Soon, a note was torn out and handed out of the window. This is the preliminary diagnosis. After your shift ends, you can go to the Ivy Medical Clinic to have a look and get some medicine prescribed. Pay attention to the doctor's advice. Otherwise, you wouldn't want to suffer from depression in hell, right? The guard who took the note was surprised and quickly nodded. Thank you, Mr. Huaisher. You're welcome. It's just a favor. The man in the cell smiled and said loudly, Next. Oomph. Seeing that he was still so arrogant in prison, Liz couldn't help but snort coldly. She raised her hand and pushed the guy in front of her away and walked straight forward. Don't cut the line. The guy who was pushed away looked up and saw Liz. His face suddenly stiffened. Soon, all the guards who were slacking off during working hours stood obediently in the corner. Liz stepped forward and stood outside the cell. She saw the radiant Huaisher inside. It was as if he was on vacation, relaxed and peaceful, without the slightest self-consciousness of being a prisoner. She even got a table for him from God knows where. And a pen. Didn't I say that you're not allowed to give any sharp objects to the prisoners? Liz frowned and turned back to scold. What the hell are you doing? Aren't you afraid that this bastard will pierce your throats? I want to point out that this is an insult to the trust and bond between us. Without waiting for others to speak, Huaisher took the lead and became serious. These guards are quite good to me. They're even willing to chat with me, a prisoner, and persuade me to surrender to the Ivy League. Not only did they not take away any of my food, they even gave me a pen to write with. As a virtuous and cultured classical music teacher, would I bite the hand that feeds me and use these things as weapons to hurt them? The guards nodded at his words, their expressions saying that Mr. Huaisher was right. How could a good person like him do such a thing? It made Liz's scalp tingle. Were these bastards brainwashed? Or did something go wrong? They didn't even have the slightest bit of vigilance. Liz looked at Huaisher in the cell and couldn't help but laugh. You look like you're doing quite well. You actually made so many friends. We're all just doing our jobs. We don't have any personal relationships. Please don't doubt the integrity of your people. If you really want to say something, just say that I'm more likable. A certain gold medal male cowherd who had no sense of shame shook his head and looked at Liz. He was surprised. This outfit matches well. Did you redo your hair? The girl in front of him now didn't have the valiant aura she used to have. Although her eyebrows were still arrogant, her makeup and earrings were perfect. After her hair was let down from the back of her head and redone, her temperament was much gentler. Coupled with jeans and a t-shirt that accentuated her figure, she looked youthful. What else? Liz asked indifferently. What else? Do you think I'm the kind of woman whose muscles grow into her brain? No. Huaisher replied sincerely. It's just a compliment. I hope so. She didn't say anything else. Even so, she couldn't help but feel a little better. It could only be said that the people in Ivy League were either a bunch of nerds who wore checkered shirts to death every day, or a bunch of straight men who didn't treat her as a woman at all. She never thought that the first person to notice her new hairstyle and earrings would be this guy. Although the short history between them was full of unhappiness, she had to admit that this guy had a good eye. She didn't let her beautiful face down. Come with me. She waved her hand and signaled the person next to her to unlock the door. The teacher wants to see you. Huaisher nodded and cooperated with the staff to handcuff and shackle him. He smiled at the others and said, Then that's it for today. Everyone should hurry back to work. Also, Mr. Huaisher, remember to eat less oil and salt. Your cholesterol has been over the limit for a long time. A somewhat fat guard suddenly touched his belly and laughed. He waved his hand at Huaisher and thanked him for his concern. Liz's expression suddenly became gloomy again. This guy, without any scruples, was showing off his deep friendship with others in front of her. He didn't take her seriously at all. Sincerity in exchange for sincerity. Huaisher seemed to be able to guess what she was thinking. He sighed and advised seriously, It's really easy to make friends. You've been a high priestess for too long and always put on airs. That's why everyone is afraid of you. Shut up. Liz angrily punched him in the stomach. She turned around and walked forward. However, when she passed by other prisons, her footsteps paused slightly. She saw the prisoner inside, the Eye of Nightmare who had been imprisoned here because of a private fight with the members of the Ivy League a few days ago. The man with muscles and scars all over his body was wearing singlet. He was holding a dumbbell in one hand and persisting in his training. In the other hand, he was holding a book. He was lost in thought and could not help but hum a few words from time to time. Liz stopped in her tracks and frowned. What are you looking at? The burly man glanced at her and lifted the cover of the book to show it. Introduction to Classical Music Appreciation. What the F***CK classical music? Are you guys crazy? Liz felt the corners of her eyes start to twitch wildly. Brother, can't you look at your own image? Do you look compatible with classical music? The man who was training looked at her blankly, not knowing what this woman was up to. Forget it. Liz gritted her teeth and walked forward with a belly full of anger. She shouldn't have accepted this job today. Chapter 568. Not long after, he saw Michelle on the spacious bridge of the airship. The colonel's avatars pushed him out of the elevator without any gentleness. One of them gestured to the other and turned to leave. The remaining one pulled out his pistol and stared at Huaisher from a few meters away. He wanted to make sure that he could be killed on the spot if he made any strange movements. The rest of them naturally came up and unlocked his shackles. Although he still couldn't use his sacred mark and soul power, at least he felt more comfortable. Huaisher rubbed his wrist and sighed. He couldn't help but complain. Can you please be gentler? We're all schoolmates. All right, I have an Ivy League diploma. Can you treat me better? When he spoke, he didn't think that people would hate heretics more than demons. He also didn't think that what he did was enough for his alma mater to shoot him a few hundred times. That diploma, I think I signed it myself. I remember now. Michelle, who was signing the document behind the desk, said without looking up, after reading your resume, I immediately agreed to Principal Russell's request. Huaisher raised his eyebrows. Don't you think it's a pity? Huaisher patted his chest shamelessly and said, to be honest, it's really painful to miss out on a talent like me. Michelle was amused. It was like listening to a 7- or 8-year-old kid telling a joke that wasn't funny. He closed the pen and finally looked up. He looked at Huaisher not far away, and his expression gradually turned cold. Don't you have any self-awareness about your nature? To be honest, I think I know my position quite well. Huaisher shrugged. You see how quickly I adapted to the role of a prisoner. A wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him. I'm scared even without you guys torturing me. You're trouble. Without giving him any face, Michelle said straightforwardly, Mr. Huaisher, whether you admit it or not, the trouble you bring is far more than your usefulness. No matter where you are, the trouble you bring is far more than your usefulness. The only reason you're still alive is because Mikhail didn't agree to exchange another core of the branch control center for you. Did he miss out on some dirty deal? Huaisher froze for a moment, then shrugged. It's understandable that a beautiful woman has a short life. Really? Michelle sneered. I can even conclude that Mikhail has never thought of any plan to rescue you. Compared to the price we have to pay to get the sub-control center, the loss you will cause is more serious. What do you think? I can't pretend that I didn't hear that. Miss to me something, you're despicably slandering my character. Huaisher retorted, be careful, or I'll sue you for personal attack. Michelle was still indifferent. This is not a personal attack. Also, there is no article on personal attacks in the law at the border. Huaisher was stunned and subconsciously wanted to refute. Then he began to think. This old man seems to be, right? Based on his understanding of the law system at the border several times, there was no such crime at all. Don't think about it. I'm a member of the Border Law Committee and the Chief Legal Counsel of Exxon Energy. If I say there's no crime, then there is no crime. Michelle glanced at him and casually tossed the certificate on the table. Also, I'm the Risk Control Director of the American Countermeasure Room of the Central Command. You'd better not use the banner of the Astronomy Society in front of me. Mr. Huaisher, 4th-class military officer. Wow, it's terrifying. Huaisher suddenly sucked in a breath of cold air. This old man can't be allowed to live. He repeatedly rubbed his eyes and confirmed it again and again. He still couldn't find any loopholes or doubts on the certificate. There was no doubt that it was a real certificate. So, this person is really a big shot? No. Why do both of you like to work part-time? Can't you let the newbies out? In the end, he could only regretfully swallow the traditional dish that was brewing in his mouth back into his stomach. He failed miserably in showing off. There was no other way. Even if the other party wasn't a big shot, his identity as an inspector was useless. Moreover, he was still at the stage of not being paid. With this identity, he could act like a tyrant in the present realm. It was still useful at the border, but in hell, it was nothing. Some of the hooligans in hell didn't even care about the 4 major armies. It was obvious just by looking at the Eye of Nightmare. Just as he was deep in thought, the corner of his eyes twitched. He couldn't help but turn his head to look at the corner. At the porthole, there was a shadow with his back facing him. His hair was white, and he seemed to be old. The man was equipped with a Teuton épée and was covered in heavy armor. He was also holding a ferocious lion helmet in his hand. He ignored Huaisher's existence and just stared out the window silently. But what was noteworthy was that, even in the reflection of the glass, his face couldn't be seen. It was as if he didn't exist here. However, the moment he saw him, Huaisher's instinctive premonition of death warned him crazily. If he courted death, he might die. Such a detailed premonition emerged in his heart. But soon, his gaze was attracted by another thing. In the control area at the back of the bridge, under the illumination of a beam of light, countless precision machines floated in the air and slowly rotated. One could vaguely see their original appearance. When countless parts were put together, they formed the wind lamp that Huaishur had seen before. And now, after the wind lamp was broken, what unfolded from it was actually a huge alchemy array that was so precise that even the entire bridge couldn't fit it. He rubbed his eyes, unable to contain his curiosity. What exactly is that? To explain it in the language of the Land of Dusk, it should be called the Maker's Proof, Michelle said. Just like the Ascendant's stigmata, it is the power and tool of the Maker. It is also the culprit that caused this hell to fall to this extent. He stood up and adjusted the beam of light, enlarging it. Suddenly, countless small, strange words appeared on the lamp. In the end, they overlapped and formed a solemn and cold emblem. It seemed to represent some authority and truth, making people feel a sense of awe. According to the life pattern on it, the name of the sub-control core should be Changer, right? He turned around, looked at Huaishur, and waved his hand. Then, in front of Huaishur, along with the mechanical changes, a table slowly rose up, followed by 2 chairs. "Please sit, Mr. Huaishur." He took the lead and sat opposite Huaishur. "The time for chatting is over. Our work is about to begin. It's coming. The plot of the torture and interrogation of secrets is coming. The long-awaited tough guy time." Huaishur's eyes lit up. It was time for him to show his unyielding might and steadfastness. And just as Huaishur held his head high, showing a stubborn and unyielding look, determined to guard the secrets of the ivory tower, Michelle slowly put on a pair of glasses, pulled out a pen, and flipped open the document next to him. "Then, when did you enter sub-control room number 4, which is the one in the underground world?" He looked up and asked, "Our calculation here is around 19 in the afternoon. Considering that you may have spent a long time on the road, is there anything wrong?" Huaishur began to feel that something was wrong. Why did he ask this? Also, there are some details in your battle with Changer. Although it was supplemented by the video and Liz's description, there are still many things that are unknown to people. Let's talk about this in detail first. He did not care about the secrets of the Iron Crystal Constellation and the Ivory Tower at all. Michelle began to ask about some details of the battle. Everything, no matter how big or small, was recorded down, including the initial state of Changer, the time of the second stage, and Huaishur's speculations and guesses without any mistakes. From the beginning to the end, the word Grandmaster did not come out of his mouth at all. He did not even mention the Iron Crystal Constellation. For a full 2 to 3 hours, he kept asking Huaishur about the details of the exploration process and wrote down more than a dozen pieces of paper. If Huaishur did not want to say, he would not ask a second time. He was purely asking about what had happened in the sub-control center. During this process, although he did not want to say too much, Huaishur would not hide some unimportant things. He once suspected that Michelle wanted to rely on these questions to make him lower his guard and then launch a surprise attack. However, from the beginning to the end, Michelle was like an old professor writing records at an archaeological site and did not care about anything outside the sub-control center at all. Perhaps this was also valuable information, but in Huaishur's opinion, it was not worth it to suffer for this. Moreover, even if Huaishur did not say anything, Liz or the other mercenaries of the Eye of Nightmare would have seen it. There was no point in keeping a secret. It was not until the end that Michelle suddenly asked a secret question. "We found that your speed during the exploration process was abnormally fast. Was it due to your keen intuition, or was it the guidance of some illusions? If it was an illusion, is it convenient to talk about what you saw?" Illusions and auditory hallucinations would often appear in the exploration of hell. Just like what the great Grandmaster had said, it was not a rare thing. It was just that the things that guided Huaishur were a bit strange. After hiding the existence of the crown skeleton, Huaishur thought about it and finally mentioned Condra's existence. Having a former colleague who could guide him in hell could more or less increase Huaishur's value. Although it was a bit of a snitch, it was not worth mentioning compared to the precious things that really needed to be kept secret: the defense of the iron crystal base, the internal situation, the personnel configuration, the experimental projects, and the research results. After listening, Michelle was stunned for a moment, and the tip of her pen paused. She looked up at Huaishir. "Kandra," she asked, "a 30-year-old from the Russian Federation? Black hair?" Huaishir nodded. Michelle was silent for a long time, took off her glasses, and sighed softly. "You know him?" Huaishir asked. "We met once." Michelle recalled carefully. He was his student. 3 years ago, I met him once when I attended a seminar. At that time, he told me that his student had surpassed him and would definitely surpass him in the future. It's such a pity. There was not the slightest hint of gloating. Huaishir could feel that it was sympathy and sorrow from the bottom of her heart. "To be honest, your place is different from what I thought." He shook his head and sighed. "I thought you would gloat." Michelle furrowed her brows. She looked up at him as if she was offended. "Mr. Huaishir, we are scholars," she said coldly, "not cannibals." Chapter 569. Huaishir was stunned. He had never heard such righteous and awe-inspiring words from his opponent. He found it hard to believe. Suddenly, he felt like he was standing at the bottom of a valley and being looked down upon by someone from a moral high ground. Don't tell me all the gangs from other places are so polite. That's why there are always people who say that there's something wrong with the heads of all the inspectors. Michelle shook her head. "Huaishir, in your opinion, is there only one way to solve the problem in this world?" Since we've already done it, then." Huaishir scratched his head. "Even if the wildfire doesn't burn it out, it will grow again when the spring breeze blows." The Ivy League is the inseparable focus of the American genealogy. Destroying the Ivy League means the complete extinction of the American genealogy. Why don't you try burning the American genealogy? Michelle sneered. If Russell really has the ability to rebuild the utopia and unify the great arcana of the present realm, it's not impossible. But if the American genealogy is gone, where is he going to find a pillar as a replacement? It's already the 22nd century now. Don't bring out the logic that's still stuck in the primitive era, okay? The corner of Huaishir's eyes twitched. This familiar venomous tone and sharp words. He felt like he was standing in front of a replica of a grandmaster. "Are you two using the same brand of mouthwash? Although I don't understand why Russell values an executioner like you so much as the nominal signer of your graduation certificate, let me teach you this lesson." Michelle raised her head and looked down at the young man in front of her. As an ascender, there's nothing wrong with fighting to the death. But for a teacher, such an approach is not worth bragging about. The Ivory Tower and the Ivy League are like fire and water in some fields, but in the end, we are not organizations formed for the pursuit of violence. The seekers of knowledge do not use violence to show their authority. Even if the battles in the academic field are often cruel and all means are used, for a scholar, nothing is more precious than life. Michelle said, "The Gauls used to be able to chop off the head of a scholar who only appeared once in 1,000 years in 10 seconds. But even if another 1,000 years passed, they would not be able to produce another creator like Lavoisier. After Archimedes was stabbed to death by the Romans, there was no Archimedes in this world. For thousands of years, countless scholars have been striving to replace destruction with creation and to replace swords with morality. Even if that day was still far away from us, it should not be a reason for us to abandon virtue and show our bestiality." He stared at the young man in front of him and told him word by word. "We inject intelligence into our knowledge and mysteries in the hope that one day it can surpass the cruelty of evil and create the reincarnation of good. Pure power represented pure nothingness. Sometimes, this power would turn into a mirror and reflect the user's appearance." Amidst her shock, Huaishir suddenly recalled what Tongji had once told her. After becoming a sublimator, no matter what your initial goal is, you will eventually become an idiom that allows you to do whatever you want. But compared to doing whatever you want, what you don't do is the most precious. Indeed, in the face of power, good and evil will be magnified thousands of times. But because of this, the importance of moderation was even more prominent. Even if he had already experienced this principle, but hearing it from Michelle's mouth still made Huaisher feel emotional. I thought the bankers and the big capitalists did not care about life. He could not help but sigh. He really did not expect to hear such a principle from someone who came from the headquarters of the capitalists and bankers. Death is a loss that must be avoided. People live in order to create greater value, and naturally, they must avoid greater value being destroyed in meaningless battles. Michelle glanced at him. If Gu Shijio did not consider this point, why would we need to make an agreement? We can directly escalate the war. Make a call here. Let the Ivory Tower and the American Genealogy each send a fifth-grade fighter to fight and decide the ownership of this hell. Isn't this more straightforward? Huaisher was speechless. After all, until now, it seemed that not many people on both sides had died. At least compared to the true meaning of a war that would not end until one side died. It could be said to be happy and harmonious. The Ivy League could indeed be said to still maintain the modesty of scholars. Even when they came and the troop invaded the carriage, they did not take the initiative to attack the group of students who did not have any ability to resist. To the greatest extent possible, they avoided casualties. Even Michelle did not really do anything to him after he surrendered. There was no lack of food for all 3 meals. There was meat and vegetables, and the intake was balanced. Not only did she allow Huaisher to gain favor from below, but she also allowed the Ivory Tower to pay a ransom to redeem him. This aristocratic treatment was really enough. Huaisher scratched his head. After careful calculation, the ones who were really responsible for fighting were the mercenaries, and a large group were the tools not considered people. However, the Eye of Nightmare, who was used as a tool, had not even spoken yet. What was Huaisher talking about? He could only go through the process first. He began to tremble in anger. Can this world be good? How can we live so that you are satisfied? Tears fail to live up to expectations. It's full of oppression for the tools. When you stand up, hell is empty. After going through the process, he realized that he was only focused on boxing. Was I just now? Across the table, Michelle crossed her arms and looked coldly at this guy who dared to be distracted during her class. She became more and more unhappy. How many years had it been since she had seen such a strange creature with such a strange skeleton? Moreover, it was a prisoner who did not have any self-awareness at all. This gave her the urge to hit someone, which she had not seen in a long time. No, I can't fall into that bastard Mikhail's trap. She suppressed her anger, retracted her gaze, got up, and walked to the back of the bridge. With a wave of her hand, the huge outer wall slowly lowered, revealing the busy laboratory behind it. She waved at Huaisher. She gestured for him to follow. The huge laboratory was busy, and the center of all the research and testing was undoubtedly the 2 sub-control cores floating in the air in the middle. One was a disassembled wind lantern, and the other was a deformed 8-armed puppet. The puppet's face was solemn and cold, like a Buddha. However, there was nothing under the body. It was just an empty shell. It was just like the remains left behind by the gods in the past. The Life Elder. He suddenly heard Michelle say this. According to the historical materials unearthed in this hell, the creator in the sub-control center is called this. It is one of the 13 saints of the hour who is as famous as the ever-changing one. Unlike the ever-changing one's exquisite ideas and unpredictable style, the Life Elder is the creator who is best at large-scale creation and reproduction. According to our research, he has completely replicated and evolved his creations like the von Neumann machine. The mechanical city we see now is the result of his creations before they were destroyed. Michelle said without turning her head, "If I'm not wrong, the one you unearthed from the oil refinery should be the ever-changing one, and the one in the temple should be the ever-changing one, right?" "I only know the ever-changing one." Huaisher shrugged. "I didn't directly participate in the research of the Iron Crystal Constellation, and I didn't have time to read the summary report before I was brought here. Before this, I didn't even know anything about this place." He carefully looked at the research center in front of him, as if he was a country bumpkin who had never seen anything like this before. Michelle walked forward with her hands behind her back and asked casually, "How much do you know about hell?" Fleischer answered honestly, "Other than the remains of the past era and the past world, I don't know much." Then, the reason for hell's formation. Fleischer thought for a long time and answered seriously, "The decline of the world and the increase of the depth." When the world began to decline and could no longer maintain its depth, it would fall into the abyss. Under the influence of the abyss, hell would be born. Like a tomb, everything would be buried in the ground and gradually disappear in the darkness. It sounds like you're not completely clueless. Michelle paused for a moment and turned to look at Fleischer. She seemed surprised that Fleischer knew about this as well. Putting classical music aside, I'm still an assistant lecturer of the abyss ecology at the Ivory Tower. Don't treat me like an illiterate, okay? Michelle heard and nodded in agreement. An assistant lecturer is better than an illiterate. You better stop talking. Fleischer rolled his eyes and wanted to hit someone. What you said just now is not wrong. Sometimes hell is born because of the decline of the world, but the world that died of old age will not leave many traces. Michelle paused for a moment and revealed a mocking smile. The hell we see now is mostly man-made. What do you mean? Fleischer frowned. It means literally, no one will accept death willingly. Fleischer, before the end comes, more or less, there will be some resistance. What we see now is the result of their resistance. Michelle said slowly, when the depth began, the people here must have been quite desperate. It can be seen that they tried many ways, but in the end it did not work. Fear leads to madness, and arrogance leads to destruction. In the end, they chose to recreate their own paradise in the dead world. Recreate the earth, recreate everything, recreate day and night, recreate everything. They even created the eternal frost furnace that can be called a perpetual motion machine, and the immortality machine that can make people immortal. In the end, with amazing attainments and technology, they succeeded in taking back everything, but everything is still unrecognizable. From the moment they accepted the gift of Hell's workshop master, this ending was already decided. Michelle announced the result in a cold voice without any pity. They ushered in a desperate situation, incurring a disaster thousands of times worse than death. In the end, what was created was this land of dusk that is frozen at the end of the dying world. As Michelle moved forward, the doors in front of him opened one after another. Unknowingly, they had already walked into the core of the airship, which was filled with countless equipment in the engine room. In the hot air, the staff were busy rushing around, as if they were urgently preparing for some mission. It was a clamor. However, Fleischer felt a wave of nausea and dizziness. He could barely stand. When the truth of the land of dusk was revealed to Fleischer, the scenes and cries in the illusion seemed to ring in his ears again. The despair that had sunk into the ground and almost formed a tidal wave. It was hard to imagine what kind of ending they would face in the end, but the fact that such a huge amount of resentment remained here proved how terrifying the inhuman torture was. Under the bewitchment of the workshop masters, the world that was on the verge of destruction turned into the hell in front of them. It looked empty, but in young Master Ming's perception, it was filled with endless pain and despair. It was suffocating. He finally understood the feeling that Beelzebub had complained about. The sharper one's perception, the more one knew, and the more one could sense the hidden ferocity. He rubbed his forehead and looked up. "Why are you telling me this?" Michelle finally stopped in front of the control panel. "You're just passing by." The middle-aged man with gray hair finally turned around and looked at him. He asked in disdain, "Mikhail, you must be looking at me, right?" He stared into Fleischer's eyes, as if he could see the figure hiding behind Fleischer. At this moment, in the iron crystal seat, a crow stood on a support in front of the huge screen. The light emitted from its eyes projected Michelle's greeting in the air. The people in charge's expression changed slightly. The Grand Master still crossed his arms and remained unmoved. He just stared at Michelle's face indifferently without saying a word. However, Michelle seemed to have received a response and sneered mockingly. "Look carefully. This time, I'm already ahead of you." As soon as he finished speaking, the airship behind Michel suddenly shook. Countless machines were operating, and the thick outer shell of the airship slowly opened. It revealed the cursed world bathed in darkness and blood rain outside. When the thunder in the clouds suddenly crossed, it illuminated the ferocious outline on the ground. The searchlights lit up one by one and scattered the cold white light on the ground below, revealing the magnificent outline of the huge man-made object. It was a building made of countless steel, an astonishing geometrical object. In just a few days, a pyramid of more than 200 meters rose from the ground on the open space. An Aztec pyramid. Under the connection of countless complicated lines, this outsider's building was deeply wedged between the machines of the Twilight Village, and they were forcefully integrated into one. Fleischer could vaguely see Liz, who was wearing a priest's robe, walking on the ground under the cover of the heavy rain. She was holding a border relic from the American lineage. Step by step, she stepped on the stairs of the pyramid and walked towards the totem representing the old gods. The secret ritual from the present realm was about to operate here. With every step she took, the pyramid made of metal would suddenly transform into an ancient building. When she was halfway through, the entire pyramid seemed to have experienced tens of thousands of years, with countless traces of moss and cracks appearing. However, the tyrannical divinity rising from it became clearer and clearer. This pyramid was gradually transforming from a fake object into the residence of a real god. At this moment, hundreds of source furnaces on the airship had been activated, burning source crystals and accumulating a huge amount of power to provide power for the next secret ritual. However, Fleischer felt that the world had darkened. He could not help but want to retreat. His hair stood on end. In front of the control panel, a withered figure wearing a crown slowly appeared. The robe was still solemn, and the crown was gorgeous, but the face under the crown was a gloomy skeleton. It was still the same appearance he had seen in the underground world. It was the phantom of the Sunmaker. The people around seemed to be unaware of this and continued to rush forward. Fleischer was dumbfounded, not knowing if he should remind them. But while he was hesitating, Michel had already strode towards the control panel behind the Sunmaker. Wait! Fleischer subconsciously wanted to stop her. However, Michel was unmoved and continued to move forward indifferently, pressing forward step by step. When she walked into the phantom of the Sunmaker, her footsteps paused for a moment. It was as if she could see the scene in Fleischer's eyes, but she did not show any fear or retreat. He muttered something softly and moved forward without hesitation, shattering the afterimage of the past. In her hand, the last control panel was pulled down. At that moment, the Twilight Village shook. An ear-piercing wail suddenly erupted from the deepest part of the darkness, stinging everyone's eardrums. Tomorrow seems to be the first anniversary of the Apocalypse's upload. I hope the update will be smoother. Also, I would like to recommend Purple Hairpin's new book, 80,000 Miles of Clear Wind. Friends who like history must take a look. Chapter 570. Amidst the sudden wails, the torrent of source substance swept through and poured down from the sky. In the furnace, the sound of countless source substance crystals shattering could be heard. After offering such a generous sacrifice, with the high priest presiding over it, it was finally heard by the heavens. The fallen gods reappeared here as illusions. They looked down at hell from the light. Liz raised the sacrificial ritual in her hand and chanted silently. Soon, the sound of a flood erupted from the void. As the phantoms of the gods dissipated, a slightly solid, towering figure walked out from it. He wore a ferocious ice-blue mask on his head and 4 strange pottery pots wrapped around his waist. Thunder, rain, hail, and drought followed him. His name was Trolloc. He was the master of rain and floods, the god of drought and plague. Now, he lifted the sole of his foot and suddenly stomped down, leaving a footprint on the mud of the altar before silently dissipating into the air. But the moment the footprint was imprinted, an endless torrent gushed out from under the pyramid. It looked like a flood, but it was just a spectacular, qualitative change of source substance endowed by divinity. In the blink of an eye, it swept to the end of the line of sight, almost covering half of the Twilight Village. From the moment he set foot here, it had become his altar, and now the area covered by the light had turned into his holy land. The fourth layer of the legendary 13th layer of the sky, the cage of the tragic dead where countless dusks resided. With this as a wedge, he forcibly nailed in a hell here, plundering the territory, drawing a boundary, and forcibly taking over everything within the range of the secret ritual. The light rising from the Great Pyramid enveloped the earth, covering almost 1/3 of the Twilight Village. As the torrent swept through, countless huge machines operating under the earth shook with a loud roar. They separated from the system of the Twilight Village and became part of the Great Pyramid. Miracle inscription, alien underworld, Trolloc. Even the angry flash in the central tower could not be contained. The miracle inscription descended here, operating between heaven and earth. It was as if a brand new soul had squeezed into this body and began to move its arms. Then the world turned upside down. Countless modules rose from the ground, forming obelisks. Like a forest, they tore apart the falling curtain of blood rain. As the earth flipped, countless cannons rose from the darkness. It was the defensive array left behind by the Purgatory Workshop Masters, and it was now under the control of the Ivy League. Adjusting the direction, adjusting the angle, extracting the majestic power from under the Earth's crust, they aimed at the sky and ignited the flames. The dark clouds trembled as countless cracks were torn apart by the cannon fire that soared into the sky. Immediately afterwards, a storm of metallic light descended from the sky. The ingots made from origin substance and steel rubbed against each other until they were bright red. They turned into a destructive meteor shower that fell towards the iron crystal throne. Even though they were far away, they could still feel the scorching pain. In the bridge, the great Grandmaster stared silently at the approaching flames, unmoved. Meanwhile, the staff members walking by the side acted as if they didn't see this terrifying scene. They worked calmly and carried on as usual. Only the boundless water around the iron crystal throne was trembling slightly. Distorted gravity spread out in the air, enveloping the entire submarine, forming an invisible deep sea that swallowed up the sky full of cannon fire. They couldn't even break through the outermost layer of defense. In the tens of thousands of cannon fire, a blazing flash suddenly appeared, just like a giant spirit throwing out its weapon in a rage. The light condensed into the sharp shadow of a stone-toothed sword, tearing through the deep sea of gravity and breaking through layer by layer. Lightning twined around it, followed by the sound of thunder. In the legends, the thunder in the sky was the rain god breaking a jar full of disasters and bringing destruction to the world. The lightning flashed and disappeared, but nothing happened. The stone-toothed sword disappeared into thin air. It was as if it didn't exist at all. Only a towering silhouette faintly appeared behind the giant submarine. It was a blurry shadow half kneeling on the ground, as if it was in deep thought with its head lowered. In that short moment, it didn't reveal any aura of wisdom or knowledge. Instead, it revealed unparalleled power and indescribable majesty. The giant squatted under the iron crystal throne. It carried the entire sea of gravity on its back and supported the giant iron crystal throne on its shoulder. It firmly separated the sky and the earth, making the world stable and unharmed. A halo suddenly emerged from the sky above the iron crystal throne and quickly spread out, covering 1/3 of the land of dusk, covering the rain and the night, shrouding everything under its own protection. The little man in the bottle, on the huge bridge of the airship, panned along, who was in charge of things, raised his eyes and looked at the faint traces left by the huge silhouette in amazement. Unbelievable. How could it be so fast? The iconic strategic weapon of the ivory tower. It was a fictional life, form born from the alchemy cauldron after countless improvements and creations based on artificial technology, the Holy Spirit. Hamen Krus. But when it grew to such a scale, It could no longer be called the little man in the bottle that couldn't even leave the bottle when it was in its infancy. It had been given a name, recorded in the miracle mark, and became a living miracle. Even if it could only exist for a few weeks, it was still an invincible and terrifying weapon. As long as one witnessed the power it displayed and the iconic silhouette, one could guess where the name given to it came from. The dome giant, Atlas. The great spirit that shouldered the earth and the sky. You've always been like this, Mikhail. Michel raised his eyes and whispered indifferently. Always hiding in your own corner, not playing games with others, hiding yourself and your creations in a place that others can't see. Now that I think about it, your autism has already shown signs since then, right? He asked softly. Shouldn't you share the joy with your peers when you have something good? No one responded. Only a sharp voice sounded in the engine room. It was the control stick that Michel gripped tightly. Now the steel was bent under his anger. You bastard. He tried his best, spared no expense, and finally took the lead. But when the curtain was lifted, he found that he still couldn't get rid of the enemy he hated. They were barely evenly matched. There was nothing more humiliating than the word evenly matched, just like how he had received it countless times before. Every time in the assessment, he was the best. But the closer he got to the end, the more Michel found that the perfect score that he fought for with all his might was just a natural starting point for some people. If only he could hear the mockery. It didn't matter if he was laughed at or despised. But from the beginning to the end, he could only get this indifferent attitude, calm and cold. Even if he was rejected and resisted by everyone, it didn't matter to him. Instead, it seemed like he took it for granted. He was so arrogant that he didn't put everyone in his eyes. Put the gift up? After a long time, Michel ordered expressionlessly, "It's better to share the joy than to share the joy alone. After receiving the favor of others, there should be some repayment." The scholar nodded, turned around, and left quickly. Not long after, in the huge laboratory, in the pillar of light, the core of the two branch control centers, the remains of the former king of casting suddenly shook. A grayish-black flame burned in the wind lamp. In the empty shell that was as solemn as a statue, 2 lines of blood tears flowed silently from its eyes. In the dark world of the village of dusk, in the midst of the bloody rain, a gust of crimson wind suddenly rose out of thin air and came to this narrow world. It moved horizontally and vertically, instantly covering every inch of the air. Wherever it passed, countless raindrops evaporated. The lush green flowers instantly withered and dried up. They were eroded by the horrifying high temperature and the violent toxins in the air, ushering in death. Then, the fluttering snowflakes mixed in with the heavy rain slowly fell. The ash-like snow powder didn't blend into the bloody water. Instead, it lightly floated through the rain and drifted between heaven and earth. Not long after, the whole world turned gray. The febrile wind and the precipitous tide. The terrible disaster that Huaishur had only seen in the witch's dream suddenly descended in this narrow hell. When he was once a giant beast, he couldn't understand the terrifying power of these two, but when he really felt their existence, he couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. The erosion bastards hiding in various corners were already screaming hoarsely. Anyone who was contaminated with a trace of gray sediment would experience mental erosion and pain not inferior to the calamity ash. The originally clear reason would quickly fade as the sediment continued to increase. In the end, they would completely fall into madness and throw themselves into the febrile wind and rainstorm. They were seeking their own deaths. They welcomed rapid aging. But before they could die of old age, they would die painfully under the burning and violent toxins of the febrile wind. In the end, only a tragic corpse would be left in the bloody rain. The current village of Dusk had become an out-and-out hell. In addition to the spontaneous combustion of the scorching sun and the petrification curse of the darkness, there was also the decaying blood rain of the Iron Crystal Throne, as well as the Ivy League's febrile wind and sedimentary tide. 5 deadly curses filled every inch of the place, almost turning this place into a hopeless situation. If there was no protection, The moment one was exposed, they would be doomed to a tragic death. But not long after, Huaisher saw a thin white fog slowly spreading from the end of his line of sight. It was as light as a layer of white gauze, faintly discernible and difficult to distinguish. But it gently covered the earth. The corners of Huaisher's eyes began to twitch. Curse! The sixth, just by looking at the scattered light of origin substances on the ground, he knew what was going on. That was the return gift from the Iron Crystal Throne. Under the corrosion of the fog, the erosion bastard's origin substances actually began to dissipate, disappearing at every moment. If this happened to a sublimator's soul, it would be as tragic as losing a large amount of blood. Their soul would probably collapse in less than 5 minutes, and they would be finished. Do you really need to be so ruthless? Huaisher was dumbfounded. He could already foresee the future of the Village of Dusk being covered in countless curses. Chapter 571. Huaisher had a dream. He dreamt that he hadn't come to the Village of Dusk, but to a hot, humid, and crazy place. It was a place filled with hellish jungles, filled with countless vicious plants and corrosive species, as well as hellish beasts and monsters. And in the middle of the sea of jungles, there were countless large and small tribes scattered around. There, he led the Iron Crystal Throne to excavate the ruins left behind by the fallen gods, the Reflection Pool. But in the middle of the jungles, they encountered a strange cult that worshipped the Ranch Master. Among them was one of the Ranch Master's 6 crowns, the Yushur. As expected, the healers who wielded the power of plague and life force were hard to deal with, but the Huaisher were no pushovers either. With the help of the Iron Crystal Constellation, they quickly spread the virus to infect the surrounding settlements of various sizes. After the large group of barbaric fanatics had been recruited, they began to arm themselves against each other. In the midst of the war, the methods of both sides were constantly upgraded, and countless new viruses were introduced. Among them, there was the element of spontaneous combustion that would cause people to burn when exposed to the sun, the Medusa's poison that would petrify people at night, the blood strain that would cause people to age rapidly after inhaling it, and the blur dream that caused people to lose origin substance. The two sides went back and forth, fighting to their heart's content. In the most dangerous and desperate moment, Huaisher pulled out the stone-toothed sword from the altar of the reflection pool and turned around to stab the Yushur in the back. Backwater strike, reverse the desperate situation. Huaisher, complete victory. And then he woke up. He stared blankly at the ceiling, feeling his pillow wet and cold. When he raised his hand to touch his face, he found that the corners of his eyes were swollen from crying in the dream. Was that dream really that beautiful? It felt very normal. So why did he feel so bitter? You're awake? Next to him, Liz's head suddenly poked out and looked down at him expressionlessly. Huaisher's eyes widened in shock. Why are you in my cell? Do you think I want to come in here? Liz raised her eyebrows unhappily. If you want to sleep, then sleep. Forget about talking in your sleep. You've already scared the guards. The entire airship's defenses have been raised 2 levels because of you. What do you think? What did I say? Huaisher couldn't react. Then Liz pursed her lips, took out her phone from her pocket, aimed it at his face, and played the video. The video showed Huaisher's cell. However, it was completely different from what he had imagined. On his bed, under the thin blanket, a body was wriggling convulsively. It was as if he had been electrocuted. His face was distorted. Huaisher couldn't even recognize himself. Even the shadow on his body was slithering on the wall uncontrollably, jumping around like a snake shedding its skin. When he suddenly tensed up and arched his body, his expression became ferocious and terrifying. It was as if something was killing him. The prisoner in the video was panting and roaring, a sharp and hoarse sound coming from his throat. It was a language that had never been heard before, and it was filled with the meaning of chaos and madness. It was unforgettable after hearing it once. Inconceivably, Huaisher actually understood. The screen was like a mirror, allowing him to see some kind of ferociousness hidden in his body. At first, it was ravings and murmurs, but in the end, it was a crazy roar. We encompass everything. We create everything. Amidst the muffled laughter, Huaisher seemed to be crying. He reached out his hand, trying to grasp the invisible air, and asked in a deranged manner, "But Sunmaker, how can we change the nature of this stone?" No one responded. However, Huaisher screamed and roared angrily. That sharp voice, even though it was recorded through the phone, stung Huaisher's eardrums. It came suddenly, and then it stopped abruptly. Strange screams, incomprehensible whispers, and in the end, madness turned into sadness and despair. In the end, only humble begging was left. "Please save us. I beg for your mercy. Sunmaker, please. Please." The soft voice quickly disappeared as the tears flowed out. In the silence, only the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard outside the door. Then, he woke up. He opened his eyes. It was as if he had returned from hell, but he realized that he was still in hell. "Are you okay?" Liz looked down at him and scrutinized him. "You're crying. It's really outrageous. Men always have a past that they can't bear to look back on, especially someone like me. It's especially unbearable." Huaisher rubbed his hair, got up, and asked, "Do you have a cigarette?" "No." Liz shook her head coldly. "It's not good for your health. Quit it while it's still early." She glanced at Huaisher one last time and warned, "Don't cause trouble. Haven't I always been very cooperative?" Huaisher looked innocent and spread out on the bed. "If you don't like it, I can change my position." Huaisher cooperatively flipped over. "I hope so," Liz said coldly. "Although I really want to kill you, I don't want to do it when you're unarmed. The more intense the resistance, the more fun it'll be, right?" Huaisher narrowed his eyes and smiled. "It's really such a pity. How about you let me make one move?" "Depends on my mood." Liz retracted her gaze and turned to leave. The cage returned to silence. Not long after, Huaisher fell into a deep sleep again. Sedimentation erosion is a common phenomenon. Don't feel too much psychological pressure. Ascendants with sharp senses often suffer from this situation in hell. Auditory hallucinations and illusions, but it's not something outrageous that's parasitic on your body. If you really want to say it, it's more like a psychological detoxification phenomenon. The next day, the Ivy League scholar finished reading Huaisher's examination report and came to a conclusion. The celestial genealogy and the abyss are too compatible, causing you to receive too much information during the battle with the ever-changing. Perhaps there are many things that even you didn't notice, but the soul itself will reject such records of things that don't belong to you. After accumulating to a certain extent, it will produce a rejection, leading to last night's situation. You see, it's like a person who's been in a high-pressure environment for a long time becoming irritable and depressed. This is a normal reaction, indicating that your soul's immune system is working. Is that so? Huaisher was stunned. I also had a very strange dream. You'll have strange dreams when you have a high fever, right? The scholar laughed. Don't worry, how should I put it? The stability of your soul far exceeds the average level of ascendance at the same level, almost reaching the 4th grade. Moreover, your mental structure and resistance to pressure are abnormally strong. The erosion of the abyss sedimentation might not even be comparable to a small cold for you. It's really enviable. Hearing the professional scholar from the infirmary come to such a conclusion, Huaisher immediately breathed a sigh of relief. It was fine as long as he wasn't possessed by some random demon or monster. He wasn't worried about whether the other party was lying to him, because there was a very obvious symbol of the twin serpents on her wrist, the Hippocratic Oath. Unlike some doctors in the present world who just casually said it, scholars who actually made the oath would often take pride in it and follow it from the bottom of their hearts. Every Hippocratic mark that never faded was a proof of high morals and a holy soul. Moreover, more importantly, Huaisher raised his eyes, and while the doctor was examining him, he quietly looked at the top of her head. A pair of slightly trembling cat ears popped out from the gap between the two sides of her long hair. Cat ears. Big sister with cat ears. Although he knew that it was very impolite to stare at other people's physical characteristics, Huaisher couldn't help but take a few more glances, and he really wanted to rub it. Is it strange? The scholar was a little embarrassed and avoided Huaisher's gaze. Sorry, I'm not wearing a hat today. Ah, it's fine, it's fine. Huaisher tried hard to retract his gaze and put on a serious look. Beast characteristics. In parts of the border where the depth was too low, this phenomenon often appeared in newborns. It could be facial features, hair, or even an extra tail. For a long time, there was a general discrimination against beast characteristics. Many places publicly expressed that they didn't welcome beast characteristics and expelled those who had beast characteristics, not only because of their different physiological characteristics from ordinary people, but also because their resistance to the abyss was naturally low. Under extreme emotional stimulation, it was easy for the soul to lose control, leading to abnormal situations. Many bloody cases had proven this ominous feeling. Before the advent of vaccines and stabilizers, beastmen were already listed as unwelcome, as if they were contagious patients. After that, due to the Management Act of the Astronomical Association, the situation didn't change much. Therefore, it wasn't surprising that many beast characteristics had the idea of revenge on society. As everyone knew, more than 40% of the members of Green Sun had beast characteristics from various borders. And these people would be particularly radical when they carried out terrorist activities. After Huaisher was attacked by the rumors in Jinling, he saw a scholar with beast characteristics in the stronghold of Green Sunday. That person's beast characteristics were very slight, just his eyes. Later, he was given to the Diwali of the Social Security Bureau as a gift. Because of that battle, he had the opportunity to enter the Orchard Gym and met Elder Luo and Senior Sister. He could only sigh that fate was really wonderful. Just as he was letting his imagination run wild, the blood sample analysis for the day was completed. The cat-eared big sister put away the tools and untied the blood sample for Huaisher. Your body is very healthy today, don't worry. Although the blood sample is stuffed with almost an entire encyclopedia of the hell virus. When she mentioned Huaisher's blood sample and body fluids, the big sister suddenly looked speechless. She couldn't resist the urge to grab a disinfectant tool and scrub Huaisher from the inside out. After she nodded to the door, another person came in, opened the medical box, and began to skillfully mix all kinds of drugs, preparing a special tranquilizer for Huaisher. Physical imprisonment, origin substance sealing, stigmata seal, 24-hour surveillance on the 6th floor, a prison on the 3rd floor underground, and a thorough examination of every pore on his body. Ivy Vine was just short of putting him in a freezer with a few hundred kilograms of shackles on him. Even so, they still used the highest standard of treatment to entertain Huaisher. Even if the virus didn't have a miraculous effect, 7 weakening curses a day were definitely not a small number. Even the tranquilizer was doubled, and in order to avoid drug resistance, the formula was changed every day to ensure that he couldn't lift anything other than his belt. And just as the injection was being administered, Huaisher vaguely felt a faint tremor deep in the ground in the distance. It's starting again. Chapter 572. Even though he was in prison and did not have any understanding of the situation outside, Huaisher could guess what had happened. When strategic weapons, such as the Otherworld Underworld Trilocan and the Dome Giant Astra appeared, it meant that the battle between the Iron Crystal Constellation and the Ivy League had entered another stage. The two sides began to have a substantial collision, fighting for control of every inch of land, and, at the same time, doing everything they could to delay the other side's efficiency. Relying on their advanced technical abilities, the two sides had already cracked the outer defense of the Twilight Village, firmly rooted in the system of the Twilight Village like a nail in a house. With such authority, even if they could not enter the core of the tower, it was still not a problem to explore the location of the other sub-control centers. Every sub-control center represented a step further control of the Twilight Village, and also meant that a new kind of curse would be injected into the hell here. Such a well-planned trap, while minimizing the enemy's strength, had to be controlled within a range that their own people could withstand. Deducting reason, toxic air, stamina halved, weakened state, bleeding incessant, accelerated decay, aging rain, febrile wind, sedimentation tide. Until now, Huaisher could not imagine what had happened outside. It was simply piled up with countless debuffs, and just thinking about it would give him nightmares. In fact, this was already restrained to the extent that a war history teacher would be moved to tears. Whether it was the Iron Crystal Constellation or the Ivy League, they all had the technical ability to easily destroy this hell. Even if it was just through curses, there were hundreds of thousands of more vicious options to choose from. But whether it was the Iron Crystal Constellation or the Ivy League, they would not cause any great damage to this hell before thoroughly exploring the central area. It was not only because the Twilight Village had a huge production capacity, but also because of what this huge production capacity represented. Even if the Twilight Village had once incurred evil consequences, it still could not cover up this point. The miracle they had created was real. It was not just the crazy past of recreating the world, the sun, the moon, the heaven and earth, and all things mentioned in the records of the ruins, nor was it just a dangerous attempt at an immortal machine. It was a real divine artifact, a truly unique, great creation. Eternal Frost Core. This was the supreme result left behind by the creators, and it had been unknown before the last War of Worlds. It had only appeared once in the decisive battle between the Hell Workshop Master and the Sea of Titans, but it had once broken the balance of the Deep Zone and dominated the direction of the war. Its function could be said to be simple and crude. In short, it was a supergiant perpetual motion machine. According to the records of the Iron Crystal Constellation, its power scale was enough to drive the entire hell without limit, and at the same time, supply a large amount of power's relics, and it could last till the end of time. It could only be said that even with such power, they still lost to the Sea of Titans. Nobody knew what kind of trash the original Hell Workshop Master was. Even if such a treasure only existed in the Twilight Village, it was enough to restrain both sides and prevent irreparable damage and losses. Now, while Huaishir was squatting in the small dark room and having fun, the battle outside must have been fierce. Huaishir, on the other hand, enjoyed 3 carefully cooked meals every day, rigorous medical examinations and care, as well as unlimited happy drinks. He even started a new business in the prison and became the Little Huaishir, making an indelible contribution to the mental health of the members of the Ivy League. If it were someone else, Huaishir would not believe that this person did not betray them. Unknowingly, he had become a traitor. He had not even found a chance to betray the organization. In fact, neither Huaishir nor the Ivy League had thought of doing this. Originally, they wanted to let Huaishir do hard labor to warm up and, at the same time, send the video to the Grandmaster to humiliate the Ivory Tower. However, after a lot of trouble, they found that Huaishir was simply mud that could not support a wall. He could not do anything, but eating was the #1 priority. He could not do any work, he could not help, he could not go to the kitchen to pick vegetables, and all of them would have diarrhea the next day. However, all the evidence showed that this had nothing to do with Huaishir. They could not beat him, nor could they scold him, nor could they release him. How could they deal with this? While others were working, he was watching. While others were standing, he was sitting. How was he a captive? He was an overseer, left with no other choice. The colonel could only kick this guy into the small dark room. You just stay there quietly. Don't come out and get in the way and hurt other people's eyes. As a result, it was Liz who was in charge of internal security who had a headache. She was so angry that she lost a few strands of her hair. This was the first time Liz found out that a sublimator could lose hair. Could it be that the rumors of the bald agent of the Astronomical Association were true? After this routine injection of tranquilizer, Huaishir's locator bracelet and the miniature bomb shackle on his neck were reinstalled. Huaishir lay in bed until 3 o'clock in the afternoon to catch his breath. His fingers suddenly moved, but in his drowsiness, he felt darkness in front of him. Curse. He felt that someone was cursing him. Even directly using something closely related to him as a medium, the abnormality of the heartbeat could distinguish the tendency of the blood to go out of control. But unfortunately, it was useless. Even during the seal, Huaishir's soul resistance was still abnormally high. Otherwise, the Ivy League would not have so many security guards. With a curse of dementia, Huaishir could only drool and wait for the battle to be over. Although a large curse that was too powerful could work, it could easily turn this guy into an idiot. Then, he would not be able to explain it to all parties. He could only use a weak curse to serve him, which was better than nothing. It was not very effective. In the darkness before his eyes, he felt as if he had been dragged into a dark forest. But soon he broke free. On one hand, it was because of his amazing resistance. On the other hand, it was because the other party did not seem to want to do anything to him. In a momentary trance, he saw a familiar person. The cabin in the forest. Little 19 stood in the darkness and was shouting something at him. But the curse was too weak. The message could not be transmitted. Then he woke up. There was a slight pain in his stomach. He found that the key that had disappeared for a long time had reappeared at this moment. Huaishur could feel that the cage of dreams was rapidly approaching him. All signs indicated that. It seemed that after touching for so long, it was time for him to move. Prison break? Huaishur murmured silently. He twisted his neck on the bed and glanced at the camera that was always aimed at him. This was a bit difficult. His fingers tapped the edge of the bed silently, and he closed his eyes. He recalled the information that he pieced together these days. The building had 4 floors underground and 3 floors above ground. The space was about the size of a small district. It was even more exaggerated than the space inside the Iron Crystal. However, he was sure that he was in an Ivy League airship. He did not know what kind of technology the other party had used to create a small ecosystem inside the airship. The inside and outside were sealed, and the only 2 exits were the outer deck and the door of the airship. Among them, the important engine equipment and laboratories were gathered on the upper floor, while the lower floor was the dormitory area, the warehouse area, the base of the Eye of Nightmare, and the prison where Huaishur was. Above him was the area where the Eye of Nightmare was stationed. If he wanted to get out, he had to find a way to deceive the layers of Ivy League's guards, break out of the encirclement of the Eye of Nightmare, and pass through the heavily guarded door. If he wanted to take back his set of equipment, he even had to enter the sealed area on the 2nd floor and open the safe. Otherwise, he could say goodbye to the cello, saddlebag, and Beelzebub. Of course, he had to deal with the wrist and the explosive collar first. Otherwise, he would be overjoyed when he walked out of the room. It was too difficult. The rotation time of the guards, his daily activities, and even the broken information that he heard from others that he could not even distinguish between true and false. Thousands of things were mixed together, making him feel dizzy. But things had to be done bit by bit. First, he had to think of a way to deal with the seal on his body. This was the easiest to deal with. Accompanied by the wriggling of his intestines and the spasms of his esophagus, and the dull pain caused by the scratch, the key with the sour taste of gastro juice had already appeared in Huaishur's mouth. Like some kind of ruminant, he sent the iron piece hidden in his stomach back into his mouth and bit it between his teeth. Thank you for Elder Luo's teaching. Thank you for Senior Sister's training. Now, Huaishur was able to flexibly control the unrestricted state formed by the combination of the drummer and used steps. With the lowest level of activation, it was enough to control the movement of his internal organs by using the experience and skills of the combination of muscles. It was easy to achieve this point. As the key rotated in Huaishur's mouth, it was already aimed at Huaishur's upper jaw. On the iron teeth of the key, countless fine iron pieces quickly shifted and changed, finally forming a completely different outline. Under the push of the tongue, it silently pierced into Huaishur's skull. It was as if it had been inserted into a keyhole. In an instant, it turned into origin substance and wedged into Huaishur's soul and sacred mark. Huaishur sucked in a breath of cold air. Intense pain swept through his entire body, but under the control of the unrestricted state, only his little finger trembled slightly, and even his heartbeat did not change at all. Everything was normal. Then, under 1,000 times more intense pain, he raised his hand, grabbed the key tightly, and twisted it. It was as if an invisible door had been opened. In the layers of seals on his body, an insignificant gap opened. After the layers of seals, the power that had been dormant for a long time suddenly surged, wanting to penetrate the seal and return to the body, but it was forcibly restrained by Huaishur. The gap was too small, and there were not many things that could be retrieved. At this time, the only thing that could bring him the greatest effect was young Master Ming's burial sanctuary. As Huaishi's thoughts turned, under the prison uniform, on his chest, the dark gap reappeared. In his body, the rolling darkness of the burial sanctuary instantly opened up. Using the dream realm as a transit point, it instantly connected to the cage of dreams that was gradually approaching the range of his senses. At this moment, the prison break began. Chapter 573. When less than 1/10 of the bone burial sanctuary was retrieved, a crack leading to darkness appeared on Huaishi's chest again. His entire body returned to its previous hollow state. The inside of his body was filled with darkness. Under the thin blanket, he opened his right hand, and a pitch-black feather silently appeared in his hand. From the cage of dreams in the distance, the gift on the iron crystal throne came. This was the limit of what the bone burial sanctuary could transmit under the heavy seal. A feather weighing less than 0.1 grams. On Huaishi's fingertip, the feather that floated like mist and had no sense of reality was covered with a layer of light, looking so elite. It was not a qualitative change of the origin substance that belonged to Huaishi, but alchemy from the iron crystal throne. He extracted the decaying dream poison from the cage of dreams, processed it again with the study of origin substances and spells, woven it into a small seed, and implanted it into the feather of the ghost crow. A seed of bubbles that was personally woven by the chief technician. In order to ensure the smooth transmission of the bone burial sanctuary, the nature of the feather could not be changed, and the feather could not even be removed during this period. Therefore, the complicated technique of living alchemy could only be used while taking into account durability and ease of use. Huaishi couldn't help but sigh in amazement at Su Qin's deep understanding of origin substances and curses. Now, a feather had appeared in the cage without any warning. It turned into a weight that was enough to pry the balance of the scales and reverse the situation. Huaishi smiled and clenched his 5 fingers. The grayish-black feather disintegrated at the tip of his finger, turning into wisps of thin mist that silently dissipated into the air. In the silence, Huaishi raised his eyes slightly, listening to the patrolling footsteps of the guards in the distance, distinguishing the distance and characteristics. "Excuse me, can you turn on the air conditioner?" When the guard walked to the door, Huaishi suddenly spoke. He raised his hand and pulled his collar, smiling at the familiar guard. "It's a little stuffy, I can't breathe, don't you think so?" About half an hour later, the guard on duty walked out of the elevator and hurriedly went upstairs. But he was stopped by the checkpoint. "Hey, don't forget to swipe the card." The outer guard raised his eyes from the Sudoku room and looked at the anxious guard. He reminded him, "You don't look too good." "Sorry, I'm not feeling too well." The guard who was stopped behind the checkpoint smiled stiffly. His complexion was indeed not very good. He was a little red from holding back, but his complexion was very pale. It seemed that he had lost a lot of blood. The temperature of the air conditioner was obviously very low, but sweat could still be seen on his forehead. The action of swiping the card was very stiff. After passing the verification in a daze, the person left in a hurry. The outer guard looked at him in confusion. He didn't know what had happened, but he glanced back at the monitor below and picked up the walkie-talkie to ask about the situation. After finding that everything was normal, he didn't care anymore. He continued to indulge in the Sudoku game. The guards who walked out of the checkpoint walked stiffly and swiftly through the layers of doors and checks. They went straight up and quickly squeezed into another elevator that wasn't closed yet. He didn't even care about the concerned looks from the other people in the elevator. He lowered his head and pressed the button for the second floor. The elevator doors slowly closed. Just as it was about to rise, it quickly stopped in place. The elevator doors opened again. The guard's hurried expression had a hint of anger, but when he saw the person who walked in, he quickly lowered his head. The person who walked in was a blonde girl with blue eyes. Liz Hetmock. After nodding to her colleagues, she pressed the button for the first floor and turned around to greet the guard. "You got off work early today, Joe." It seemed that he was stunned for a moment before he realized that she was calling him. The guard nodded and squeezed out a smile. A trace of sweat faintly seeped out from the back of his neck. It felt a little strange. The elevator doors slowly closed, rose quickly, and opened again. Liz walked out and met the assistant waiting in the corridor. The two talked for a while and walked forward. But Liz's footsteps suddenly stopped. Something was wrong. "What's wrong?" the assistant asked. Liz didn't say anything, but a bad guess emerged in her heart. Her expression gradually turned ugly. In the elevator, they were close enough. She could even hear Joe's heartbeat. It was abnormally fast. She associated it with his slow reaction and subconsciously tense body. She also faintly sensed a gaze from behind her in the elevator. For a moment, she wondered if she was a little allergic. But when she thought of Joe's position and the abnormally high danger level prisoner in the prison, she had an even worse premonition. "Something's wrong," she whispered softly and suddenly turned around, running wildly behind her. The assistant couldn't even catch up. "Where are you going?" To stop the situation from getting worse, Liz ran as fast as she could. At the same time, she ordered everyone to urgently search for traces of Joe through the internal communication. She, on the other hand, rushed straight to the prison on the 4th floor. Thinking of the possible situation, her expression became gloomier. She didn't even care about the astonished gazes of others. She pulled out her stone sword and ran rapidly in the corridor with the speed of a ascendant. Hopefully, she could still make it. In less than a minute, she had already broken into the deepest part of the prison. The stone sword in her hand emitted a blazing light. But when the elevator door slowly opened, she didn't see the tragic scene that she expected. Everything was normal. Only 6 guards who had nothing to do were chatting with coffee cups. When they saw her come in, they were stunned and quickly put down their cups and stood at attention. "Where's Joe?" Liz asked. "Where is he?" "He just left." "What about Huaisher?" Liz's eyes widened. She saw the guard point in the direction of the prison. "There," she heard a low and kind conversation. "So, sometimes you're overly irritated and want to use violence because you feel that someone is violating your safe zone. Your violent behavior is actually a kind of overprotection of yourself. It's an overly magnified sense of insecurity," that very kind and calm voice said, "including the conflict between you and the Ivy League ascendant this time. Because the misunderstanding was magnified, it led to this kind of thing happening. You need to constantly examine yourself, Bonner. Indulging in violence won't change your situation. It will only increase the degree of your drinking." There was a faint, helpless voice sniffling, as if choking. "I know, Mr. Huaisher, but sometimes I can't control myself. I don't know what to do. Do you remember what I told you?" The kind voice sighed. "You can't indulge in the superficial and irresponsible stimulation of sex equals love, alcohol, and illicit drugs. Bonner, you need a regular and normal life, a hobby that can calm you down and let go of yourself. Did those classical music books help you after reading them?" Yes. Next to Huaisher, the incomparably burly nightmare, covered in muscles and tattoos, wiped his tears and cried like a child. "I dreamed of my brother last night. At that time, he wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't like this. I don't know how long it has been since I dreamed of him. I remember that we talked a lot, and after I woke up, I felt much calmer." "Very good, Bonner. You're changing, aren't you?" In the cell, Huaisher smiled and was extremely gratified. "You're getting better step by step." Noticing Liz walking in, the conversation between the two temporarily stopped. Then, Huaisher saw the gloomy Liz and the stone sword in her hand. He couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. "Miss Liz, you finally can't help but want to kill me? Cut the crap, Huaisher." Liz stared at Huaisher indifferently. "What the hell are you doing? What are you referring to?" Huaisher spread his hands in confusion. "I'm already in prison. What the hell can I do? Who do you think you can fool with such an illusion?" Killing intent appeared on Liz's face. She suddenly pulled open the prison door and reached out to shatter the shadow left behind by Huaisher. However, the moment she touched it, her expression suddenly froze. Huaisher had already been sent flying backward. He was smashed against the wall and slowly landed on the ground. He vomited a large mouthful of blood. His breathing was weak. This was not an illusion. Was it real? Liz found it hard to believe. At the same time, outside the door, an Ivy League sublimator hurried in and whispered in her ear, "We caught Joe. He's in the infirmary and didn't resist much. After verification, he's not someone else in disguise. There are no traces of hypnosis or orders in his consciousness." In short, everything was normal. Liz froze on the spot. In the silence, Huaisher lay on the ground. He raised his neck with difficulty and looked at her. As if he had guessed something, his expression became extremely strange. "Hey, Miss Liz," he held back his laughter and asked curiously, "You don't think I'm in disguise, do you?" Liz's gloomy expression said everything. Ignoring him, she turned around and asked, "Why did Joe go to the infirmary in such a hurry?" "To prescribe medicine." It was Huaisher who answered. He propped himself up and leaned against the wall. His expression became contemptuous. "Miss Liz, Joe was diagnosed with the early stages of claustrophobia 5 days ago. Because of this illness, he submitted a transfer report and will be transferred to the above-ground area tomorrow. Today is his last day of work here. Why do you not know your colleagues as well as I do? Or do you think that even this has something to do with me?" Claustrophobia. Liz was stunned for a long time, but she realized that if this was the reason, then everything became very reasonable, and she was just overreacting. But looking at the man in front of her, she felt that something was wrong. Even if it didn't make any sense, she felt that it must have something to do with the person in front of her. "What are you staring at?" Huaisher curled his lips. "Do you think I can make him claustrophobic? How long have I been here? If I'm really that awesome, why don't I just move my mouth and make all of you schizophrenia? Or you can just treat me as your savior and worship me. What do you think? At the very least, it can eliminate some people's unfounded prejudice against me. Search him." In short silence, Liz gave the order. She decided to follow her intuition. Chapter 574. Following Liz's order, Huaisher was searched. In fact, he didn't need anyone's help. After taking a breath, Huaisher got up from the ground and took off all his clothes in front of Liz. Without any concealment or delay, he opened his arms and let the guard come up and check him from head to toe. Even his hair was not spared. Nothing was found. All the findings showed that everything was normal. The thorough inspection even found traces of Huaisher's ribs being broken by Liz's punch. After the inspection, Huaisher was still standing in the same place, quietly looking at Liz. Liz had already averted her gaze and looked elsewhere. She waved her hand and urged, "You can put on." "That's it?" Huaisher asked regretfully. "Don't you have any other requests? I thought you would like to play some special game." Liz looked into his eyes, and her eyes were angry. "I said, put it on. It seems that you don't like it." Huaisher understood, but he didn't move. "What a coincidence, I don't like it either. So, don't you think you have something to say to me?" With that, the naked man took a step forward. He was clearly in a cage, and his body was not covered at all. But he was as magnanimous as a king sitting on a throne, wearing a solemn and magnificent robe. He stared at the girl in front of him and told her, "I think at this time you need to apologize for your rudeness and offense, Miss Liz." In the silence, Liz looked straight at him. Her eyes became more and more dangerous, full of anger. But after a long time, the anger was finally replaced by reason. She gritted her teeth and made a vague sound. "Sorry, I didn't hear you." Huaisher raised his head and raised his voice. "If it's any other humiliating order, or if you want to send me to a suspicious room to take an unhealthy bath, please speak louder so that your subordinates can hear you." Dead silence. Dead silence. Liz looked at him expressionlessly. Huaisher also smiled and looked at Liz. After a long time, she slowly spoke. It was so clear that he used standard Latin to tell Huaisher in front of him. "I said I'm sorry." "It's all right." Huaisher smiled, as if he didn't feel the chill, and patted her on the shoulder. "I forgive you." Just like that, he turned around. He bent down to pick up the clothes on the ground and put them on one by one. There was no shyness or concealment at all. Her actions were even a little flirtatious. Using all her rationality, Liz finally managed to chop the bastard into two from behind. Just as she was about to turn around and leave, she heard Huaishi's voice. Miss Liz, although we have only known each other for a short time, I can feel that the reason why you choose to be high and mighty is not because you are arrogant, but because you do not allow others to look down on you. Huaishi leisurely buttoned his shirt, pressed the throbbing wound on his chest, and advised, but when you're high and mighty, it also means that you're distancing yourself from others. Just like Joe's claustrophobia this time. You should have noticed it long ago, but you didn't. In the silence, Huaishur turned around and stared at Liz's hand that was holding the stone sword. He looked at the bulging veins on it and sighed softly. Sometimes when you look too high, you will ignore the details on the ground. In the silence, Liz didn't speak again. Only a fierce, murderous intent emerged from her eyes. It was so ferocious that it sent chills down one's spine. Huaishur's words just now made her feel even more uncontrollable anger than his previous actions. Huaishur could even conclude that if he were in another place, he would have been hacked to death by Liz's sword. But now, she couldn't be angry, because she had a set of stubborn moral standards and a strong sense of responsibility for her work. Also, she was the one who was in the wrong first. It had to be said that this feeling was really refreshing. Watching Liz's departing figure, Huaishur stood in the shadows of the cage and revealed a strange smile. It was a pity that she didn't listen to his words. Sometimes when you look too high, you will really ignore the details on the ground. It was obvious that Huaishur wasn't the only one who felt Liz's unprecedented anger and murderous intent. Even the other guards personally experienced the fear of falling into an abyss. But unexpectedly, they didn't feel any displeasure or anger towards Huaishur. Instead, they felt that what he said was very reasonable. This, although Ms. Liz wasn't very approachable and was a bit fierce, she was still a very good person. She was responsible for her work and never pushed the blame to her subordinates or delayed troublesome work. She was brave in her work and was never afraid of difficulties. It was simply perfect to have such a leader. But if she could understand what the people below were thinking and get rid of her bad habit of being unreasonable, wouldn't that be good? But there was no doubt that everyone could feel Liz's anger at this moment. Even a glance was enough to know what kind of anger she was on the verge of. When the elevator door opened, the guards on the upper floor were almost frozen by the chill. They froze on the spot and didn't dare to look directly into her eyes, even if they already knew what was going to happen below and were mentally prepared. In a sense, the inheritor of noble blood was a descendant of God. In ancient times, when she was angry, everyone had to kneel on the ground and beg for mercy. The kind of violent majesty was not something that ordinary people could resist. It wasn't until a long time after she left that the guard finally caught his breath. He couldn't help but rub his neck and let out a long breath. Oh my God, that was too scary. Calmed down and solved 2 Sudoku puzzles, but just as he picked up the pencil, he saw the elevator door open again. A blonde girl walked out from inside. There were still some traces of water on her face. It seemed like she washed her face and then stayed alone in the bathroom for a long time before she finally calmed down. The guard on the upper floor was stunned. "Ms. Liz, why are you here? Didn't you just... Before he finished speaking, a bad guess emerged in his mind. Soon, Liz's forced calm expression quickly turned gloomy. "Who did you say just left?" She frowned. "I've been down there the whole time. But, I just saw." The guard looked incoherently in the direction where Liz just left. "Let me guess." Liz looked at him expressionlessly. "There's one of me who just walked out, and you didn't even let her swipe the card, right?" The guard's vision went dark, and he finally realized what had happened. This was F*** King finished. In less than a minute, the entire prison ushered in a thorough search. The first thing to bear the brunt was a piece of terrible news. The Huaishur in the prison was just a dummy, a crude illusion, and all the trackers and explosive shackles were still stuffed under his quilt. None of the guards even found out. Then, the second piece of bad news was the underground prison surveillance had been covered by an illusion a few minutes ago, and all the images sent from below were fake. And the alchemist who was responsible for monitoring Huaishur's physical characteristics and imposed a curse and seal on him was found unconscious in his workshop. deep in a nightmare, unable to extricate himself. He was actually cursed in reverse in the dead silence. Liz's expression twitched. She gripped the stone sword tightly, her expression twitching. Her subordinate came up and wanted to say something, but just as he opened his mouth, he heard Liz's roar. Bastard! Under the slash of the stone sword, the cell in front of her was completely torn apart. It was a mess. But soon, she calmed down. Seal the entrance and exit, Liz ordered. Investigate all the surveillance and find out where the imposter went. And where are his things? Where are his weapons and things? She finally remembered that Huaishir's equipment was still sealed. In other words, the next attack location. The moment the news of Huaishir's escape was discovered, the entire airship's internal security was quietly raised to the highest level. Even if there were no changes on the surface, countless surveillance and security personnel mixed in with the staff were all in place, searching every inch of the airship's space. In this urgent situation, when Liz rushed into the core storage room with her subordinates, she couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. Everything was normal. Huaishir hadn't had time to enter this place. Continue searching. Don't let go of any traces, Liz ordered angrily. If I find out who is negligent in their duties again, you will run to prison and stay there until you reach the realm of rebirth. As she spoke, she walked into the laboratory and looked at the panicked scholars. Where are his things? Take me there. As for the others, hurry up and evacuate. This may become a battlefield later. Soon, after the double authentication of a supervisor in the guard, the treasury that sealed dangerous items and border relics slowly opened up. Huaishir's saddlebag, pistol, and even a cello bracelet were all kept in the cabinet at the front. Nothing was missing. After a careful inspection, the guard finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then he saw Liz reach out and pick up the pistol that was decorated with the relief of Lord of the Flies. She skillfully weighed it in her hand and twirled it twice. Then, she revealed an unsettling smile. Long time no see. How are you? She asked softly. Just as the guard was stunned and didn't know how to answer, another voice sounded. I'm about to explode from boredom. On the gun handle, Beelzebub woke up and looked up. Just like you, perverted enough to want to wear women's clothes. We're really good partners. Thus, after the girl's face dissipated like mist, a cheerful smile slowly appeared. Before the watcher completely fainted, two words appeared in his mind. It's over. Chapter 575. In fact, Liz's intuition was not wrong. This was all Huaishir's doing. Including knowing the guard Old Joe's situation, he deliberately used words without leaving any trace to trigger his fear of the enclosed space, causing him to fall into an abnormal state. This was a test before the prison break. Huaishir originally wanted to see how vigilant the Ivy League was towards him as a prisoner, but he did not expect to hit the jackpot. In every sense of the word, it was purely an accident that he caught a big fish like Liz. He did not know whether it was good or bad luck. If he was lucky, no one should notice Old Joe's abnormality. If he was unlucky and was discovered by Michelle, Pandalong, and the others, those old foxes would never be so impulsive. Instead, they would quietly increase Huaishir's level of vigilance after a careful investigation and set up a trap for him in advance. Even if they were not sure whether it was Huaishir's doing, at least they would set up a trap first. Sooner or later, he would jump into it. In fact, Huaishir had already heard that he was going to be sent back to the present realm before this. Huaishir did not panic at all. According to the agreement between the Iron Crystal Constellation and the Ivy League, in order to limit the scale of the war, the entire Twilight Village was allowed to leave but not enter. Both sides had used their own methods to firmly seal off this piece of hell. Huaishir would not be able to enter after he went out. But what about the people who would escort Huaishir? With Huaishir's danger level, if you wanted to escort him, sending a few Tom, Dick, and Harry would simply be sending him to his death. If they could not suppress Huaishir with absolute strength, it was basically equivalent to sending him for nothing. If they could suppress Huaishir with strength, then Huaishir would have profited. This round of 1-for-1 was not a loss. He promised to be quiet and not cause any trouble along the way. He made up his mind to drag the enemy's high-level combat power and let everyone go home happily. In the end, he waited and waited. Every day they said they were leaving, they were arriving soon, but Huaishur waited and waited, but no one took him to board the ship. They even stood him up. It could only be said that they had enough. Therefore, attracting Liz's attention was a good thing for Huaishur in a sense. A woman with sharp intuition, a warrior who had always been vigilant and angry towards him, an opponent who looked arrogant but was actually very childish. Even using such a person would make one's conscience ache. Fortunately, Huaishur did not have that kind of thing. He was just a cold and heartless negative energy generator with a taunting function. If Liz could really listen to Huaishur's advice and carefully think about the details on the ground, she would definitely remember that old Xiao's claustrophobia was personally diagnosed by Huaishur when she first met Huaishur in prison. That way, even ghosts would know that there was something wrong with him. Unfortunately, such a thing did not happen. What a pity. After triggering old Xiao's fear of the enclosed space with words and hints, Huaishur began to silently prepare for the prison break. When he began to talk to the prisoner next door, he had already awakened the bubble seed in the crow feather. Then, he planted it on his own body. He put a curse on himself. When Liz arrived, Huaishur had already fallen into a different kind of trance, almost unable to distinguish between reality and illusion. It was as if he was heavily intoxicated and injected with anesthetic. He had to thank Liz for that punch, which allowed him to sober up a little. The poison of the rotten dream spread through his consciousness, but it could not dissolve him in the nightmares and illusions. When he advanced, he had already fused with the remains of the evil creature, so he had an extremely high resistance to the poison of the rotten dream. How could there be a snake's venom that could kill him? Then, the poison of the rotten dream began to spread from his consciousness. A seed quietly sprouted and quickly disguised itself as a part of Huaishur's body, seeping into the seal and the curse on his body. Ivy's inspection and body search were very thorough, but if it was not in a laboratory and analyzed by a specialized curse alchemist, how could the poison of the rotten dream be so easily identified? Otherwise, wouldn't the already dead rotten dream be too weak? At most, the only signs that could be seen were a lack of sleep and the scattering of origin substances. While the two of them were conversing, the bubble seed had already taken root and sprouted in Huaishur's body. After completing its first stage of development, it formed an outline and began to spread a second time. After seeping into the seal and the curse, it began to spread toward the other side of the seal and the curse. Curses often worked in both directions, unless one used various ingenious methods to create a springboard or used puppets or scarecrows as substitutes. The curse itself would become a bridge that connected the two sides. Back then, half of Bloodkiss had died to the counterattack of the Rotten Dream's remains. After infecting Huaishur, the poison of the Rotten Dream began to spread through the network formed by the curse towards the alchemist who was still doing research in the workshop. By the time Liz left, the alchemist had already been silently trapped in a living dream, unable to break free. When the seal and the curse lost the control of the caster, they silently began to collapse. After the door opened, Huaishur's divine mark and soul turned into a torrent and returned to his body, making him complete again, returning to his complete state. The tranquilizer in his body was covered by an even higher level of poison in less than a yawn. It couldn't even compare to the carbon dioxide in the water. At this time, the Rotten Dream's poison that had spread through the bubble seed returned to Huaishur's control. From budding to growing to the third stage to maturing. It was a dream that had solidified. Even though it was slowly withering and dying, it would still be able to bring Huaishur a lot of convenience before it ended. The first thing he created was an illusion. It covered the prison Huaishur was in. Apart from creating the scene where Huaishur was lying motionless on the bed, he didn't add anything else. Instead, he deliberately disturbed the image and left a flaw. When Ivy broke the illusion, she would naturally treat all the records in the surveillance as a false image created by Huaishur. It took 5 seconds from the moment it was unlocked to this point. Soon after, the consciousness of all the guards was deceived by the rapidly spreading dream, and they had the illusion that Liz was still arguing with Huaishur. Huaishur raised his hand and pressed it on the bracelet on his wrist and neck. He carefully changed the metal composition of the explosives with the sealing hand to weaken the destructive power of the explosion, so as to avoid any mishap where his hand slipped and exploded on the spot. Next, young Arbiter Ming's sacred mark split into an afterimage. Under Huaishur's control, the staring silhouette stood in front of Huaishur, while Huaishur lay down on the bed and covered himself with a blanket. He raised his hand and pointed at the afterimage in front of him. The afterimage also raised its hand and pointed at Huaishur. The moment the two fingers touched, Shadow Burial activated, and the two positions perfectly swapped. In an instant, whether it was Huaishur's shackles, they were all transferred to the afterimage. Within the translucent silhouette, Huaishur actually discovered 6 small tracking devices. Huaishur could sense 2 of them, but he didn't notice the other 4 at all. Looking at their positions, it seemed that they had been implanted into Huaishur's blood vessels, bones, and muscles while he was unconscious. And these were all left in place when Huaishur's body turned into origin substance, and were all inherited by the afterimage. He threw off the last of the restraints. It took half a minute to reach this point. The next step was the most dangerous part of the plan, which was the actual prison break. The bubble formed by the decaying dream poison covered Huaishur's body, causing his body to slowly change. After he became 3 centimeters shorter, his long hair gradually turned golden, and his face quickly changed into Liz's appearance. Thanks to Huaishur's careful observation of the original person, the width of the shoulders, height, and other data were all correct. Just like this, Huaishur walked out of the prison with his head held high and his chest puffed out. He raised his hand and dispelled the illusion of the guards, allowing them to return to reality and perfectly continue the argument that had come to an end in the illusion. "You're not allowed to give this bastard any food tonight," Liz ordered, then turned around and fiercely yelled at Huaishur in the cage. "Isn't it just because you're a little better looking? Once you see reality, you'll know what the consequences of offending me are." After saying this, she raised her head and left amidst Huaishur's pleas. She also went to the bathroom, washed her face, and walked into the elevator. Then came the next part of the plot. The entire process of breaking out of prison had actually overturned Huaishur's previous plan completely. Huaishur had an idea. In reality, such an action was still too rash. There was no need to leave behind such traces. If he had found another opportunity, the Ivy League might not have noticed anything amiss. However, it would definitely not be so easy to get back his weapons and equipment. If he escaped from here empty-handed, he would have suffered a huge loss. Not to mention Beelzebub, just the wise man's survival bag alone was the only divine weapon in the world. How could it be like this, where the Ivy League's warehouse was open for him to take weapons and equipment as he pleased? It was all for free. After taking off his prison uniform and quickly changing into all his equipment, Huaishur rubbed his hands and looked at the other items in the warehouse with sinful eyes. The Astronomy Association limited the supply of origin substance to 60 people. Big blue bottle. Good stuff. Too bad he got heat stroke. The best silver blood potion, ancient blood. 10 people. Good stuff. Looks like his leg is broken. Take it. Divine light of grace. Resurrection potion. Such a fat body must not be good. Don't keep it for yourself. Give it to me. This dagger looks good. It's at least an A-grade border relic. I'll take it first. I'll give it to little 19. This ring looks very familiar. I think I've seen it in the relic catalog. It can increase perception and deterrence. The flaw is small. I'll take it. Even if I can't use it, I can give it to little 19. There's also this set of armor, this small shield, and this pair of boots. The color matches little 19 quite well. What a coincidence. It's actually a 2-square-meter crystal tree core. I'll cut it into pieces and put it back. I'll change it into a chopping board for feng shui later. Following the principle of a thief, not leaving empty-handed, Huaishur directly took out the messy items in his backpack and stuffed it full again. As for the smelly socks and dirty clothes, Huaisher saw that the shelves were empty. He put them all up for them. There were gains and losses. The Ivy League did not lose out this time. It was a pity that the more precious items were in another deep storeroom. Liz did not have the authority to go in and would not have the opportunity in a short period of time. Otherwise, he would have been able to give out another bunch. After cleanly sweeping through a pile of strategic resources, Huaisher also gifted them 2 origin bombs and incendiary bombs. After they were all timed, Huaisher carried the fainted guardian and floated out. After closing the heavy vault door, he casually stuffed the unlucky guardian into a corner of the laboratory. It was a success. When Huaisher walked out of the laboratory with Liz's face, the subordinate who had been waiting outside for a long time came up with a look of anger. That unconcealable look of anger scared Huaisher so much that he thought he had exposed himself. "We found Huaisher's tracks." The subordinate gritted his teeth and said, Huaisher was stunned. He immediately restrained his nervousness and showed an angry look. "Where did that bastard hide?" The subordinate hesitated for a long time and did not speak. Chapter 576. What's wrong? Huaisher frowned. The subordinate stammered. According to the surveillance records, after she left the prison, she hid in your room and locked the door. I don't know what she's up to now. Needless to say, this guy must have imagined a lot of perverted things that were not suitable for children. Huaisher was stunned for a long time and suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of guilt. Did he say that his daughter was a little harsh? She had already closed the door to reflect on herself, but she still didn't know that she was being blamed for no reason. It was a little too tragic. Did she notice anything unusual? Huaisher asked. No, the subordinate said. We didn't alarm him. Very good. Liz nodded and said seriously, although that bastard is good-looking, don't be fooled by him. He's very cunning. Gather our men first, seal off that area, and then attack with full force. Don't give him any chance to escape. Yes. The subordinate nodded, but still stood in the same place, obviously waiting for her to go together. How could Huaisher, a fake, dare to confront a real person? If there was no Michelle Buddha, he would be exposed, okay? In fact, he had already planned to leave. He could only find an excuse and wave his hand. You guys go first. I have to report to Teacher Michelle. The subordinate was stunned for a moment, and then looked confused, but Principal Michelle has already led the team away. Miss Liz, have you forgotten? In a short silence, Huaisher's expression under the illusion twitched, and his hair stood on end. He could only barely maintain his composure and coughed. I'm confused by that bastard. To think that I used to love him so much. The subordinate was stunned at first, then stunned again, and finally stunned again. His expression changed rapidly, and his heart shook violently, as if a pile driver had been stuffed in. He was dumbfounded. Big sister, what are you talking about? In order to cover up the mistake just now, Huaisher had to throw out some shocking news to divert his subordinate's attention. At this moment, although he felt guilty, Huaisher still tried to put on a sad look. He reached out and stroked his lower abdomen, sighing sadly. He was indeed lying to me. The subordinate stared blankly at Liz's actions, his face turning green. What the hell? What's going on? Big sister, what are you trying to do? Sorry, let me be alone for a while. I need some peace and quiet. Huaisher lowered his head, rubbed his face, and tried to take a deep breath. He finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the dazed subordinate leave through the gaps between his fingers. He finally managed to coax his mother away. He turned around and went into the corridor. After turning the corner, his clothes and face quickly changed into the appearance of the subordinate just now. He hurriedly turned into the toilet. Liz's identity would be exposed sooner or later, but her appearance as a subordinate might not be safe either. She had to find a harmless identity. The seed of bubbles could last for another 10 minutes. Huaisher closed the bathroom door behind him, nimbly took out a small match from his saddlebag, and lit it. A small flame flickered. It actually faintly reflected the scene on the iron crystal. The old man in the iron crystal seemed to have sensed something and turned around. He looked at Huaishur through the flame and smiled. The purser's illusory voice sounded in Huaishur's mind. Seems like you've succeeded? About half. Huaishur replied. You're not going to let me break out of prison alone, right? Where's the backup? Raymond's voice sounded in Huaishur's mind, mixed with the rough sound of the engine, as well as a series of roars. I'll approach your airspace in 3 minutes. At that time, once you send out the signal, the Alsatian will help you evacuate. If you need help, this is for you. Following the purser's voice, Huaishur suddenly felt that there was something extra in the cage of dreams. Using the illusory dream world as a medium, Huaishur struggled to pull out from young Master Ming's stigmata. He found that it was a stack of beautifully printed cards. On the cards were modified giant Ratmen warriors, the original bodies of the Paradise Guards, a total of 26 cards. This was the Muse Club's drawing summoning technique. Through some method, life was compressed and sealed in small cards, which could be released when necessary. It was equivalent to a summoned beast that could be carried around. Tools of tools, I've had enough. Huaishur sighed and put the cards into his pocket. He seized a short time before the match burned out and asked, Then what's my mission? Escape. The purser paused and said seriously, Of course, under the premise of ensuring your escape, the bigger the better. A series of roars suddenly came from afar, followed by an ear-piercing alarm. The ceiling shook for a moment. Huaishur shrugged. If that's the case, we're almost there. Then, return safely as soon as possible. Before the flame went out, the purser reminded him one last time. I will. The flame shook and extinguished in front of Huaishur's finger. A faint wisp of smoke rose in spirals. Huaishur threw away the match and quietly counted down according to his pulse. When he counted to 102, another series of roars came from afar. The vault exploded. Then, an even more ear-piercing alarm sounded in every corner. Huaishur pushed open the door of the toilet, washed his face, and heard chaotic footsteps from the corridor outside. Someone was running wildly into the distance. Screams could be heard faintly. He pulled a piece of paper, wiped his hands clean, threw an alchemy bomb into each toilet, and pushed the door open. He blended in with the crowd and went in the direction of the exit. Relying on constantly changing his appearance, he didn't encounter any unexpected obstacles along the way. Instead, because he didn't know the way, he took the wrong path twice before he finally found the place. At this moment, Huaishur had already transformed into a well-dressed ascender. He wore a pilot jacket and strode toward the airship's hangar. At this moment, the hangar was bustling with activity. Flying machines were constantly being pushed over from the outer deck. Countless workers were anxiously repairing them. At the same time, there were even more flying formations rushing into the sky from the outer deck in the distance. The injured Eye of Nightmare was also carried out of the cabin for emergency treatment. It was as if they were in a state of war. It was busy and chaotic. People were coming and going everywhere. It was exactly what Huaishur wanted. He lowered his head, quickened his pace, and blended into the chaos. He was inconspicuous. However, gradually, it became difficult for him to move forward. He was only one step away from the outer deck, but it was as if he was carrying a heavy burden. It was difficult for him to move. His face was ashen, and he was sweating profusely. He felt like there was a knife on his back, but he didn't dare to turn around. The people around him also noticed his abnormality and looked over in shock. Immediately, they retreated in panic amidst the sharp sound of steel rubbing against each other. A beam of dim yellow light shone in from the open hangar door in front of him, illuminating Huaishur's face. The light of the setting sun elongated his back. Backward, it extended all the way to the end of the hangar under the iron boots. In the darkness where the light could not be found, a man in armor slowly walked out. The emblem of the Eye of Nightmare on his shoulder opened silently, emitting a cold red light. The lion helmet covered his face, cold and calm. Go back, Huaishur. The man who had seen him once on the bridge said in a hoarse voice, One more step and it'll be hell. The captain from the Eye of Nightmare, Silent Everly, said, Even if you say so, it's hard for me to obey. Huaishur couldn't help but laugh softly. Chaotic footsteps sounded. The guards who were running over raised their guns and aimed at the lonely figure, ready for battle. Even outside the hangar, on the outer deck, there was a sharp sound. It was the sharp sound of a stone sword scraping against the steel on the deck. In the deep ravine, sparks flew. Liz walked forward step by step. Her green eyes were cold and emotionless. She looked a little disheveled. Her hair seemed to have been burned by something, and her fair skin was stained with soot-like traces. Behind her, the sun rose. It was an illusory sun wheel. The blessing from the first sun was also the emergence of the killing intent in the blood of God. Little bits of pitch-black solar eclipse appeared from it. In the end, the dark sun turned into a ferocious wheel of light, signaling the arrival of the dark era. The first era of the sun was about to end. God would abandon the world, turn into a tiger and leopard, and devour all his people. This was the most primitive destruction in the myths of America. Huaishir, stand there and don't move. She stared at Huaishir's face and told him word by word, I'll go over now. An unprecedented killing intent enveloped Huaishir's body, causing him to feel a piercing pain. But in the last short gap, Huaishir couldn't help but turn around and look behind him. Let me ask a cliché question. How did you find me? Color. AI fully said, I've seen the color of your soul, Huaishir. Only this color can't fool people. I want to ask what color my soul is. I only have one question now. Huaishir smiled awkwardly and pointed at his opponent, who was walking towards him step by step. High Priestess Liz had lost all rationality in her fury. If I surrender now and return to the prison, can you help me stop her? AI fully was still indifferent. That's your business. It has nothing to do with me. Then there's no other way. Huaishir retracted his gaze and looked at Liz, who was walking towards him step by step. He smiled. Then he slowly lowered his body and gathered strength between his taut muscles. Just as everyone was watching, he closed his eyes, and then, with a plop, he knelt on the ground. In an instant, silence fell. Everyone's movements froze in shock. I'm sorry, Miss Liz. I lied to you. Huaishir bent down and put his hands between the deck and his forehead. He shouted loudly, For the sake of our unborn child, please give me a chance. Let us start over. You bastard. Liz's teeth ground together and sparks flew. Then, an indescribable malevolence appeared on her beautiful face. Go to hell! The burning stone-toothed sword roared. Wrapped in blazing flames, it slashed towards Huaishir's head. But faster than the stone-toothed sword, there was a sudden loud noise in the sky. Under the endless gray sea of clouds, a black shadow suddenly broke through the clouds. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.